Hello survivors and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 63 and in this edition we actually venture into Raccoon City for the first time, canonically speaking. As it turns 25 years old, this edition of the podcast is all about 1998's Resident Evil 2. My name is Cy and joining me on the panel this week, Keycards, Dark Rooms and Birkins, it's Kelsey aka KDB.
Hello.
Kitted up in a big trench coat and leather gloves and intent on his mission, try to come up with any biased opinions on this game, it's Fire Button Steve Valance.
Hi everybody.
There is perhaps no more appropriate show to remind everyone to kindly, please, praise them both. From Steamforge Games, it's Sherwin Matthews.
Hello.
And they locked themselves in the First Aid Spray dungeon and refused to come out until we did an episode on RE2, it's Michael Burger Time Early.
I'm glad that you took me up on my offer.
Every episode of First Aid Spray is...
Sorry, just to throw in there, how is it that none of us they hadn't noticed anything was wrong until, you know, they'd done something or other?
Tyan City was festive. I was going to do it. Who are you? What are you doing here?
Exactly. I was assuming that, you know, there'd be a kendo reference in there. No,
one of my working intros was... nobody's going to leave my show, everyone's going to podcast, so...
Are you crazy? The entire city is still infested with zombies.
Every episode of First Aid Spray is recorded live on our Discord server, so join now to hear the show early and unedited and to become part of our fantastic little community where we discuss life, the universe and Resident Evil. You can find a link to the server as well as all of our social media profiles at our website, faspraypod.com. It's the support of our listeners that keeps First Aid Spray going, so why not check out our merchandise or our Patreon page. Tiers begin at just $1 a month. Head over to patreon.com/faspraypod for a full list and a chance to create bonus First Aid Spray content. Let's keep housekeeping as brief as possible. But there has been an influx of new content in the last couple of weeks for patrons, so you guys are living it up right now. The latest episode of Tier Death Experience is out, where Steve Sherwin and I ranked all of the canonical tyrants in the series. So if you liked the Hunter episode that we did a while back, you'll love this one. It was a good time indeed. We have a new bonus episode out on, of all things, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for the Mega Drive/Genesis. Probably the furthest back we've gone in terms of bonus episodes and definitely the most far removed from Resident Evil, but it was a wonderful time and you can find out who on the panel had never played Sonic 2 before. And also we have new episodes of Memory Card Lane. For patrons, you can now check out my guest appearance alongside Steve and Jordan on MCL, talking about Croc for the PS1. Who remembers Croc? Everyone remembers Croc, but is it any good? And publicly, the new Memory Card Lane episode that just dropped today as of recording is The Simpsons Bart's Nightmare. Yes, talking about The Simpsons on First Aid Spray. That's a thing that happened. That's everything from us. Steve, would you like to roll us into the Biohazard news?
Our first story. Glame Flavour produces a limited run of First Aid Spray drinks.
That might be a typo on my half, I expect.
Game Flavour? It says Glame Flavour.
Yeah, I think that was a me. Yeah, Game Flavour, quite obviously. We were always keen to talk. It seems we're always keen to talk about Resident Evil merchandise because some of it's so bad. And then this comes along, a limited edition. Quite literally, they're only making like 400 or something of these, 4,000 of these. And it's a box that looks like the item box, and it's full of First Aid Spray cans that are full of drink, mint cucumber flavour, apparently.
Sounds terrible.
And ink ribbons with drink powder in them. It looks cool. It will set you back a hefty €200. Which is pretty stupid
for the standard.
From where I'm coming from. That is just for the standard. The limited edition is, I don't know, something like 4 times the price of that. It's ridiculous. Yep. Kelsey, what do you make of this?
It looks fantastic, I have to say. Like the presentation of it, the box and the ink ribbons and stuff looks amazing. But for that collector's set, it's like $900.
Yeah,
so I will never ever have this, and the flavour sounds horrible as well. So, and then it says also unique NFTs that are metaverse ready.
Ooh,
so
pass. Ouch.
Yeah. So no thanks.
So this actually reminds me of a recent conversation I had with somebody who was drinking the Resident Evil 3 flavored G Fuel powder.
Oh yeah,
which is lemon iced tea. For some reason.
Okay.
like, I was blown away by it. No, she really enjoyed it. But yeah, it's weird that the Resident Evil flavor was limited. And there's a second time where I was like, that's a weird flavor for a Resident Evil product.
I mean, I get it. Iced tea virus, you know?
Stretch. It's a stretch, but I'll allow it. It sounds more enjoyable than cucumber mint water. Cucumber lime mint is actually technically what it is. Yeah, it doesn't sound good. Like I've said before, it seems like a bit silly that I don't have some kind of canned first aid spray on my shelf. But yeah, at this price, and including an NFT, is certain to drive me away. Not a fan of this. Steve, what do you reckon?
I'm not a fan of crypto, and as much as I consume these carbonated nightmare drinks on the daily, like, cucumber, you lost me there. So, yeah, at that price, no. Aesthetically, like everyone else said, yeah, it looks kind of neat, but then there's so many drawbacks, not to mention the price.
Is you're literally not buying it to drink the beverage. You're buying it because it's a first aid spray can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just go on Etsy or something, right? Surely someone's done something really nice.
100%. You get something way better that someone's put actual time and effort into.
Could actually be like a medical spray.
Yeah. Sherwin, any interest in extortionate cans of first aid spray?
I genuinely thought NFTs were extinct by now. Perhaps that was wishful thinking.
Give it time.
Yeah. No, I think I'll be saving my pennies on that one.
I think that's the wise choice. We have also one tiny other headline that might not be worth getting into, but Steve, we might as well shout it out.
Hold the phone, everybody. Get really excited. K9 from Resident Evil Village.
Who?
It's in our reverse. Come on! Standing ovation.
Am I correct to understand that the only characters that have been added to that particular game are...
The Hound Wolf Squad members, yes. Every single one of them is now in the game, as predicted. And nothing else is in the game, basically.
So again, I sit here and I ask, who?
Yeah. That's the right answer. That's the right answer. I think there might have been a couple more skins added with this, but I'm not completely sure. I did boot it up and had a quick look, but I've not jumped into a game. Why would I do that to myself?
You can now play as RE3 style Jill and shirtless Jack Baker.
Oh, jeez.
My elation is through the roof.
Oh, God, I got the vapors right now. No, that sounds dumb.
I'm trying to subtly look up the Steam charts for this, as James isn't here to do it for us. And see how many people are playing.
I will say this, though, that the one time I played that game was with all of you, and I had an absolute blast doing it. So the game is not unfun, to its own credit.
I'm not against the idea of community nights where we play something of that, or Resistance or anything, but my God, this has been such a missed target kind of thing. There was so much opportunities in scope for this, and it's just been like a full-on bit the shed moment. It's not good.
As an update, as of 6 minutes ago, 50 people playing our Reverse, a title which has been out 2.5 months. So yeah, it's going great. Like the week of an update, 50 people playing on PC. Good stuff.
Cool.
Oh, well, that'll do it for news then, I guess. Let's roll right into the long-awaited Resident Evil 2 1998 podcast. And now, reading the file Operation Report from Resident Evil 2 1998, in character as David Ford, Brian C. Sundin, who you can find on Fiverr as B. Sundin.
Operation Report, September 26th. The Raccoon Police Department was unexpectedly attacked by zombies. Many have been injured, even more were killed. During the attack, our communications equipment was destroyed and we no longer have contact with the outside. We have decided to carry out an operation with the intent of rescuing any possible survivors, as well as to prevent this disaster from spreading beyond Raccoon City. The details of the operation are as follows. Security of armaments and ammunition. Chief Irons has voiced concern regarding the issue of terrorism due to a series of recent unresolved incidents. On the very day before the zombies' attack, he made the decision to relocate all weapons to scattered intervals throughout the building as a temporary measure to prevent their possible seizure. Unfortunately, this decision made it extremely difficult for us to locate all ammunition caches. It has become our top priority to recover these scattered munitions. To unlock the weapon storage. As stated earlier, it will be extremely difficult to secure all the ammunition. However, a considerable supply still remains in the underground weapon storage. Unfortunately, the person in charge of the card key used to access the weapon storage is missing, and we've been unable to locate the key. One of the breakers went down during the battle, and the electronic locks are not functioning in certain areas. It has become a top priority to restore the power in the power room and secure those locks. Recorder, David Ford.
Where to begin with this episode? We've been a podcast now for 4+ years, and we haven't talked about this game at length. I don't know if I've been putting it off because I'm scared to talk about it because it feels like such a big deal. But also it was just kind of like, we can keep just pumping out other content and save some of these big hitters till later. But as of the time of recording, we are closing in on the 25th anniversary of Resident Evil 2. In fact, if you are listening to this on the day of release, happy 25th birthday, Resident Evil 2. Can't quite believe that. So, of course, we have to all start with our earliest memories of the first ever sequel to Resident Evil. Sherwin, what was your first reactions to Resident Evil 2 back in the day?
I mean, obviously, we'll take 1.5 out of it, I guess, right? Because otherwise, that's the thing. I first encountered Resident Evil 2. I didn't realise it had been released. I'm that much of a fan that, having loved the first game, actually seen stuff of 1.5 and getting what became 1.5 and getting super excited about it, I didn't even realise the actual game had been released. And I was at a party. One of my friends literally said, "Hey, I've got Resident Evil 2," and that was all that anyone saw of me at the party as I disappeared upstairs to go and sit in a lonely bedroom and play the shit out of that game until, I think, about 4 in the morning, at which point I realised that everyone else had left the party, my friend had fallen asleep, and then I just kept on going for another 2 hours. So, yeah.
Time well spent.
Time extremely well spent. Since then, I mean, obviously I've played it about 1,000 times. I think for me it was Resident Evil 2. If you want a sort of rough first take, it wasn't just a continuation of a game that I'd fallen in love with, i.e. Resident Evil. It was something where I played it, and at every sort of step along the way, every moment, whether it be the intro section in the streets, whether it be getting to the police station, whether it be seeing some of the cutscenes and realising how many characters are running around, other bits and pieces, every step I was just sat there and found myself going, this is just getting better and better and better. And I'm going to deliberately keep it there because I know everyone else is going to want to talk about their stuff and I don't want to overlap. So that's that.
To that point, Steve, what was your first exposure to Resi 2?
First was, I think, a PlayStation magazine that was using at the time 1.5 images. And then the Director's Cut disc that came with, the Director's Cut disc, which ends with Ada in the Star's office. And I literally must have wore that disc to death, playing it over and over and over up until PlayStation Magazine. This has got to be pre-launch or near launch, and they released the 10-minute demo disc. And I was noticing, this is different. You can't go straight to the bus. You got to go through the basketball court and everything. Full-on hype train, just buying all the magazines. And then the second it releases, bang, Mum, can I have this? It's 15, Stephen. I'll be good. And Steve used all his pocket money, bought it, and then proceeded to smash it for the next week. It was definitely a euphoric time. So yes, needless to say, I was hyped and following it from its release, or up until its release, and it's not let me down.
Yeah, I am in a weird position where I've told bits of this story before because Resident Evil 2 is the first Resident Evil game I ever played, so I didn't have the context there, but it's kind of a weird scramble of things because I certainly remember playing a PC demo that came with the magazine and enjoying it aesthetically and stuff like that. I loved the tone. I was really into monsters and stuff like that as a kid, but just really struggling with the controls, especially trying to use a keyboard to play it as well was not my forte. And then I also wound up with the PlayStation version. I don't know if that's because I asked for it or what, but I imagine I probably played the demo and just like, even though I could barely get anywhere with it, I was just really interested and constantly looking it up and wanted to know what was around the next corner. So yeah, I probably was just like, you know what, I do actually want to play this game proper. Maybe I'll fare better on the PlayStation. I'm not sure what happened, but yeah, it's been around since day dot for me. It's one of the, we talked about doing a Sonic episode recently, but this is just as informative, slightly later on, but certainly I would still call it like a childhood game for me. So yes, heavy nostalgia with this one. Kelsey, what was your first experience with RE2?
Very similar. I also played the demo that came with Director's Cut, and so at the time of launch for RE2, like I was completely obsessed with Resident Evil as it was. And I remember when it came out, I couldn't get it because I didn't have my own money, so we rented it from like the nearest video shop that also had games. And I remember it being unavailable for ages. And I've told this story before that I actually read a walkthrough for the game, like cover to cover, before I even played the full game, which I know sounds just like heresy, but
no,
at the time for me, that was, I wanted to just kind of like soak up the game, and that was the only way I could because I couldn't get my hands on it. But then when we eventually did rent it, like rented it like 5 or 6 times, and then not long after that, I got my PlayStation chipped, and a friend of the family gave me a completely legitimate copy of Resident Evil 2, and that was my copy for like a year or so. And it was pretty much, it wasn't the only thing I played, but I just played it so much those first couple of years. Fell in love with it, it was the talk of the playground, kind of like what Steve said. And I remember being the person in my village that people would come round to with their memory cards, because I was kind of considered like the RE2 pro. So if they were stuck, they would come round mine and I would help them. And I remember feeling incredibly cool because I would have been like 12, I suppose. And then like all the bigger boys in the village, like all the teenagers, would be coming round to mine to bring their memory cards and help them with RE2. So yeah, I've been there since the beginning as well. Was already obsessed with Resident Evil 1, and then this, just increased my love exponentially.
And Berger, what's your RE2 story?
I actually did a deep dive on this one because I was wondering if I was conflating two memories together. And I think Resident Evil 2 may be the first time I'd ever seen a game played on the PlayStation. Because I definitely remember being at someone's house and seeing it and being like, oh, that's a PlayStation. I'd never seen one before. And I asked about it, and the two older teenager, I must have been 12 or something. I was really young. Were like really excited to talk about it, and they really wanted me to play Resident Evil. It's that sort of vibe that like I get now when I recommend somebody a game, where I'm like, oh, I want as everybody in this call is certain, they've heard me talk about Control before. And like I remember just being so blown away, like navigating the world the way it did. Just it removed the survival horror from the experience for me, because it was the first, like if. The memories it's triggering. It's one of the first times I remember navigating a 3D plane with voice acting in a video game.
Right, yeah, same.
Was wild. And I never heard of it before. And I played it the one time. I couldn't save, so we played it all night. But we kept dying and having to start over. And so we didn't get super duper far as we were playing it. But we... had a great time because they didn't have a memory card. That was the thing. They didn't have a memory card, so they just played games and I now can't fathom,
right?
Like trying to play a game that way. But no, blew me. Obviously, it kindled my love to the point when I got my PlayStation. Resident Evil 3 ended up being one of the only games I had, so I played the out of that one. No, I loved it. It was a great time.
So Of course, the original game, PlayStation, launched in January of 1998 to ridiculous reviews across the board. CVG gave it 5 out of 5. Famitsu 37 out of 40. IGN gave it 9.3 out of 10. A lot of the PlayStation magazines were giving it 5 out of 5, 9 out of 10, so on and so forth. Sales-wise, it was one of the best-selling PlayStation games of 1998. It's probably one of the best-selling PlayStation games, full stop, I would expect. And then of course it's launched since then on PC, smushed down onto the N64. It's also on Dreamcast, GameCube, and we have obviously had the remake, but focusing on the original game. We're going to try and go through and try and sum up our thoughts and feelings on this game. Let's start with gameplay, I suppose. I think in a way, possibly the most simple thing to talk about, because for me, RE2 as a game, I mean, it's clearly not like a big reinvention. This is all about refinement over the original Resident Evil, isn't it? So, so it's a lot about, just making things more comfortable.
Better.
Controls just feel better. Auto aim kind of comes as standard. The UI, the inventory, all that stuff is better. Kelsey, how do you feel about how RE2 plays?
So something I hear a lot these days from people who didn't play these games when they came out, and I mean like RE1, 2 and 3, is they say that they're really awkward to play, and like not just in regards to tank controls, but even with things that we're all used to, like item boxes and typewriters and backtracking and things like that.
Going in and out of the menu to reload.
Exactly. And I get that, and I can appreciate that perspective, that it might feel clunky and frustrating to play. But for me, it's just the opposite, because this game and these games were like my learning to ride a bike. So I played them when I was really young, and I played this style of games as they first arrived, as the technology was first arriving. So it's not a problem for me, and I got used to it. So I don't think it's clunky to play. And, I've heard similar complaints about Signalis, which I've banged on about. But again, I'm just used to it. I'm used to these games. So, I'm not going to do a survival horror deep dive. I think the game nails that stuff for the most part, even if it does just dial up and focus on the action more than that, with survival horror kind of being second for RE2. But I do love the gameplay.
I don't know that I agree with that.
I think, the variety of weapons, enemies, just so much diversity there. It never really feels dull. Right from the get-go, it throws you right into it, surrounded by zombies straight away, which is just, after being so obsessed with RE1, that was like a masterstroke for upping the ante for gameplay and expectations of what this game would be, to just be, as it starts in the game, you're surrounded by zombies. So yeah, the gameplay for me, I do love. It never feels like it strays from the realms of reality as well. It always feels grounded, and this is why, we talked about Shadows of Rose a little while back, where I said I no longer felt like I was playing Resident Evil, and because that takes its feet off the ground, whereas with something like RE2, everything is in the world, it's locked and it fits. And even with like the custom Magnum and the custom shotgun and the minigun, it just feels like all this weaponry, this is stuff that I could wield in the middle of this situation. So it just made the gameplay all that kind of more, I suppose, immersive for me. Love the depth of multiple scenarios and different endings. It's just the package. It's basically 4 games if you want to be generous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not including 4th Survivor mode as well. So yeah, so much.
There's just so much content there. Like for a game released at this time, there's. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's just it was 2 discs. That was a big deal back at the time. The package was insane, and I think, it like you said, Si, it is almost like the simplest thing to talk about. It's just refining and amping up everything from RE1 in brilliant ways. If I wanted to maybe pick something that I was, trying to balance this out, I could maybe say the puzzles are sort of like fine. Most of them are like, put an item in this slot or move this and move that, which I think at the time of the release felt quite challenging, but maybe these days you could say the puzzles have they pale in comparison to things we get. I mentioned Signalis again and Scorn, So, and that's just me trying to look at gameplay as a whole and say, oh, all this stuff's really good. Oh, maybe the puzzles are something I wouldn't shout about. But I think the overall experience, you know, enemies, gunplay, finding your way through that maze, it's just, yeah, I love it. There's so much depth to it, and yeah, incredible gameplay package.
You've already hit on my one criticism of the game, basically, which is the relative lack of puzzles. I think I can see what you're saying, but also compared to RE1, it's a step down in that, and I think that's intentional. Like, this is designed with a more action focus and sort of pacier and that kind of stuff, which we'll obviously get to. But the puzzles, most of them are kind of crap, I guess.
They're so simple. Yeah.
Like, they're really simple. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it detracts from the game for me, but you know, if I was looking for a criticism, that would certainly be it. The only thing that I don't like sometimes, and I actually sadly can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but there were a couple of times on the playthrough that I did this week in preparation. There were a couple of moments where I was like, if I didn't know that I needed to examine this specific spot, there are a couple of things where I feel like if I was playing this for the first time, I'd be running around in circles trying to find this key item or whatever, because sometimes stuff does.
Yeah.
So I think the evidence locker room is a prime example of that, where it's like you are just kind of running around pressing X hoping to find an important key item. But beyond that, yeah, that's basically my complaint. Sherwin, how do you feel about the evolution between RE1 to RE2?
Oh,
the way that it feels?
no, you need to give Burger time to speak, because otherwise they're going to carry on interrupting everybody.
Sorry.
Go, Burger.
I
Burger's
was
fidgeting. You
just
go first.
commenting along. No, y'all hit the nail right on the head. My complaint now is that it's at this point it's a game that's 25 years old. So there's just a lot of games that do what it's doing in a more satisfying way to me now. But in the context of 19 games that were also made in 1998, God, it's just such a big deal. Like there's obviously other survival horror games that came around that time, like Silent Hill was not Resident Evil, but you could see where like they dialed it in, and that's what they did. Like they said, refinement was the key here. I don't know that I would agree. I don't know that I agree with KDB's assessment that it feels less survival. Like it feels less survival horror to me. It feels like a game that just highlights the lampooning of the situation. It's like it's what Dawn of the Dead did, right? It's escalating in a way that I find to be very rewarding, because it's what it asks for you incrementally in the moment when it asks for you to suspend your disbelief a little bit. It's not much, but then you're rewarded with a liquor when Leon looks up at the wall. You see, what's this blood pool? Okay, you look up and here's this monster. Pardon my language. And then you play the game and you meet, Sherry, for example. And then Sherry, it's like, oh, there's this other monster. And you're like, okay, what's worse than this other monster that I fought? And then you find out, and it is so cool to see. It's just another escalation that's rewarded. So, like, when you walk into the giant freaking underground laboratory later, you're like, yeah, this is where I belong right now. This is appropriate for where we're at in this game. I love that feeling. Resident Evil 3 is another good example of that. But that one did go way more action.
It's funny, actually, you talk about like a Silent Hill, which comes out next year and stuff like that. Like, while I was replaying it, I was thinking about all these games that people call like Resident Evil clones. If you want to include Silent Hill in that, then fair enough. Like, a bunch of games sort of span off from it.
Especially after Resident Evil 4.
Right, but I mean like this fixed camera kind of style, like your Blue Stinger for Dreamcast, your Deep Fear for Saturn.
Carrier also the Dreamcast.
Right, Alone in the Dark, A New Nightmare as well, to an extent. People call them
Vampires.
Yes, there you go. People call them Resident Evil clones. They're more appropriately Resident Evil 2 clones.
Yeah.
Like Resident Evil 2 sharpened that style to a point. That everyone was like, okay, we're going to make our own version of that. It was really after RE2 that people went, this is a massive sea change moment in terms of video games. If you want to call it as an art form, but you know, the classic phrase of, I feel like I'm playing a movie.
100%.
Resident Evil 2 was a big part of that.
Yep.
Yeah. Sherwin, how do you feel about this transition between RE1 and RE2?
I think this was, as you saw in the first three games are effectively evolutions of the sort of classic RE concept, and I feel like by the time you got around, so obviously initial one is what it is, introduces the whole thing. That's what it is. I think RE2. And then obviously following on from that, RE3 was the series, but more so with RE2 was the series really finding its feet more than ever before and landing at a point where it knew in a more sophisticated way how to be what it was. Whether you're looking at the interface, whether you're looking at, in terms of your controls and so on, which I'll just quickly jump in here, I think is perfect. I think you will seldom find a game that feels more intuitive to your hands to learn and to play than the original RE engine for what the actual game was. I appreciate we can talk about how, going forward, people now find conventions have changed and everything else, but if you are to look at that game and you literally pick up a controller and start steering it at that time, the most intuitive thing possible.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think, that's mastery in itself. And I feel like if you were to look at, that, but sophistication of how it does jump scares, sophistication of storytelling, sophistication of weaving in as many characters as it did, and enemy types, and introduction of how they all work, astonishing across the board. The only parts, and we'll touch on this later on because I'm sure this isn't necessarily it, the only part that really for me continues, it's a sad thing because the concept is breathtakingly brilliant. The execution is sorely lacking and sadly wasn't very well implemented in the remake either, is the B playthrough. And we will touch on that, I'm 100% sure.
Yeah, we will.
But in terms of anything else, in terms of how you go around, and I actually disagree with you. The puzzles are mostly fetch quests. Cool, fine with me. It suits the type of game. You don't have to.
Right, for sure.
Like,
I was just stretching to try and find
absolutely. Something this game does astonishingly well is gives you this idea that you are in the police building, you're in the RPD building, and the zombie, there is a countdown happening. The zombies are going to break in at any one point, and all it takes is a single cutscene, just at a certain point where you're like, okay, game over, I need to get out. And the way it's done that is simply by giving you a couple of notes from David Ford saying the zombies have come to get us, and we're trying to get out while we can. Maybe a mention from Marvin about zombies being attacking, and then literally a cutscene. And immediately you've got this sense of, I am running around, I need to get out, I need to escape. But if you think about everything else, like, whether I'm to think about, again, all of these are different interwoven things, but music, I know we'll talk about that, because I'll force it into the podcast if we don't. But the point is that, music and other bits and pieces, everything is just so much more sophisticated. And as a result, and obviously gameplay is a perfect... It's such a broad brush. It's difficult to sort of hone in on any one thing, because it obviously, there's an awful lot in there to discuss.
Yeah, for sure.
But as I said, I think, it just steps up. It's more sophisticated. It doesn't necessarily do dramatically new things, but the content that it does show is just so much stronger than the first game.
Mind blowing. Yeah.
Spot on.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, Steve. I was just going to say, in terms of that, I have my complaint about it's the puzzles or whatever, but I agree because the pacing is incredible in this game. Like, it really blows your mind to think that, considering the history this game went through of being nearly finished and then scrapped and started again and being I don't want to say rushed is harsh, but like they would have had far less of a time frame.
They would have been sleeping in the office, I imagine.
Yeah, 100%. And the pacing on it is so perfect because the RPG, as a location, I mean, it goes without saying it's incredible. It's far less intricate than the Spencer Mansion, which is great because it allows for a more streamlined experience, and the puzzles, or lack thereof, or the more simple versions of puzzles feed into that, because RE2, as you so rightly said, Sherwin, is about the pressure of getting out of the situation, whereas RE1 feels like the night that could stretch on and never end. And it's that's a part of it. RE2 is about go, 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 go. Like the story is constantly moving, and you want to know what happens next, and you move through the story, and then once you've done that, it's all about replayability more than ever, this game, which is why it's got 4 scenarios and stuff. It wants you to play it over and get better at it, which is why everything, the location, detail, and the puzzles, it's just really streamlined.
And again, this all plays into the how kind of ridiculous those beat playthroughs can get too, because like Mr. X comes in, and that's like, again, another escalation of the experience that
yeah, exactly,
is wonderful, and that's another mechanic that absolutely changed video games going forward.
Steve, you've been very patient.
Sorry.
I have. I want to I want to go all in here. So
Steve hates it.
Gameplay wise, what was that? Gameplay wise, it's mechanically it functions very much like an iterative version of Director's Cut with the built-in lock-on. But I think it goes so much further towards the actual level layouts and pacing in this game, because no other Resident Evil before or after does the whole, the very starting screen, 7 zombies are here to kill you, find a way out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even, I think the riskiest otherwise is RE3's one singular zombie. You could probably walk around. That threat level that can tear you apart is like a sink or swim moment, which is great, because this whole game's thing is about empowerment to me. From zero to hero, you the second room you're in, there's an optional chance to get a shotgun. Most people would say mandatorily, but some of us go for the alternate outfits, and then before you even meet the first proper boss of the game, be it A playthrough or B playthrough, unless you count the Tyrant as a boss, I don't, not really, you can walk around him, you get all of your main weapons.
Yeah.
But then the game counterbalances this side by having its Hunter equivalent introduced literally room 3 of the police station. It's great how it's done this, because it's literally those who are professionals at Resident Evil or have played the first one to death and have unlocked the rocket launcher, beat the Tyrant and all that, they have so many stumbling blocks thrown their way, but then the game will, if you look out, go out of your way to find weapons, shotgun ammo and magnum ammo or grenade rounds, bowgun rounds, you're going to be swimming with it, and you'll become so flush with ammo that you can just blitz through the game so fast. I would argue that the simplicity of the puzzles accommodates that. So literally it's built for speedrunning before speedrunning really became a thing.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I also think, just quickly to touch on something you said there, Steve, sorry to interrupt your train of thought. I believe Resident Evil 2 was the first time where the game series says, hey, you're in a cutscene, you're normally safe. No, you're not. Literally, here's some zombies, in that Kendo gun shop scene.
Right.
I think, anything in Resident Evil, I often categorize it thinking about it you're almost, especially Resident Evil 2, you are running from, cutscene to cutscene. It's that pervasive sense of isolation. Okay, I'm holding my breath. I must survive. I'm looking for resources. I'm looking for items. I'm trying to get my way through this thing. And your cutscene is like the bit where you, okay, tension drains out of my body. I watch the next part of the story, and then I get going again. This game, literally, I've taken you out of a stressful situation where I'm chasing and running away from zombies. Okay, here's a cutscene. I can get my breath. No, I can't. There's zombies. That's a whole new level of tension.
Adrian Leon, I'm going to sit on the tram for 5 minutes. Oh no, here comes Birkin.
Yep.
Right.
The
the doorway in the B playthrough, for example, that you're it's just a door transition. No, it's not.
But then even getting used to certain hallways, and then you play the B scenario, and then Tyrant bursts through the wall, and it's again, just unexpected.
Wild. Yeah.
You think you're safe, and you're not.
Anyway, back to Steve.
But so to compound all this, then you've got stuff we're going to get into it a bit more, I think, later on, but the whole zapping system thing and lots of optional puzzles that can then affect each playthrough. And depending on what you do in certain playthroughs, can tailor it in more ways than I think is just opaque. If you shoot certain monsters down or pick up certain ammo packs, I believe it alters what happens in the other playthrough regardless. It's very intricate. And then on top of that, you've got an interesting story, some honestly horrifying sound design and stuff. Again, that we'll get there in a bit. And I think it's a package that's not been replicated since. Even Remake 2 doesn't do half the stuff that the original Resident Evil 2 does.
Yeah. In
terms of getting that forward pace. And no offense to Remake 2, but the momentum can be taken in and out when Mr. X is making you wait in the safe room for 10 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's start talking about the story and that kind of stuff. We'll loop back round to zapping certainly, but the story of Resident Evil 2, which obviously takes place a few months after the original game in September of 1998. At this point, all hell has broke loose when you first get your hands on the controller. Raccoon City has gone to hell, basically. And the T-virus is everywhere. We have zombie apocalypse essentially playing out. And you have 2 discs in the box, on the first release at least, to play in any order that you like. One character, obviously both of these characters have gone on to be hugely important for the series. In fact, many characters in this game have gone on to be hugely important for the series. But of course, your playable characters, rookie cop Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield, looking for her brother and encountering lots of overlapping storylines. I guess most prominently, Umbrella trying to swoop in and steal the brand new G-Virus, which leads to the mutation of William Birkin, which is kind of, I feel like, the centre point of the story, really. But there is a lot going on. Steve, since you were so patient last time, do you want to go first and talk about how you feel about Resident Evil 2 as a story, which I feel is like a huge question, but please do your best.
I think it's rather good. I feel that some bits perhaps could do with a bit more fleshing out in the wider scope of things. But as a get in, get out, here's a crisis and a resolution of a story, I think it does everything it needs to. The ins and outs of it, Leon meeting the spy Ada and then getting betrayed by her are compelling enough. But then you've got Claire being surrogate mum / big sister to Sherry while Sherry's being hunted by her own father. Has a horrible scene, even if it's just sound-wise, of what happens with her father. Also, there's an alligator somewhere, Annette yells at people. And then there's a really badass scene of some USS troops getting ripped to bits. It's pretty good. Yeah, there's a lot going on. I think it's more riffing on aliens than anything, but just changing some bits around, though, in terms of encounters and certain set pieces. I feel like the nuances of story are something that my brain is trying to put together and jumble sentences, though, so I'm going to pass on to someone else.
That is completely fair. Berger, how do you feel about RE2's story?
I have a controversial opinion. And
oh no,
say that it was only okay. It's exactly what it needs to be, and that's fine. It is not, it's pretty. I like it more for the whole package than anything. Like, the story to me ties together the rest of the experience in a way that I think is satisfying.
You said it right, Bergs. It's pretty.
Yeah, it is pretty.
I think there's some fairness to that, because one of the compliments I have about it is that this game is a balancing act of your own level of interest. It can be as simple as you want it to be. It can be, let's get in and out of the city and save the small child or whatever, and that's it. But there is obviously, depending on your interest level, a lot more depth, and you can invest your brain into piecing all those bits together. So it's totally valid to be like, the story just serves for me a good experience.
Yeah, it ties it together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not to jump in on other people's points, I think one of my favourite parts is the optional stuff. Your lore, you'll learn about the downfall of the RPD, and then the photos, especially the photos, because there's one that shows the tyrant in a case, or maybe a G creature, and you have no idea at that point. It's just crazy what you can just find just by going a bit out of the way, if you're not just trying to blaze a trail through the plot.
Yeah, if you don't pick up the files or anything, that does dampen the experience. Like I said, I don't dislike it, but I do not think it is incredibly groundbreaking, if nothing else.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Kelsey, how do you feel about RE2's story?
This is where my heel turn begins.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I've politely disagree with Berger. I think it's incredible. I've said before how I think Resident Evil 1 made me realise that video games weren't toys, and RE2 enhances that, and kind of the story is a huge part of it, because it brings it so much closer to an immersive movie experience. It's way less conspiracy than the original, and more about relationships and family, which to me is just the stuff that I prefer. I think I've said that before on other episodes, and this story wants to proudly stand alongside a Hollywood movie. And some of my favourite movies of all time, as cheesy as some people might think they are Terminator 2, Alien, Aliens, Child's Play, Halloween, all that stuff like that. And the story in this game does so much to reference all those classics, and right from the intro cinematic, it's saying pay attention to the story, because that cutscene with Leon and Claire, you know, the high rendered cutscene, it does so well in setting this story up. It's good. It's, if you've been playing Resident Evil 1 for a couple of years and then you come on to this, the huge step up
Such
in
an improvement.
dialogue, voice performance, editing, and
Yeah, for
quality.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're watching a movie rather than an intro to a game, and it's still good to this day. You know, I saw it yesterday as well. So, if we're going to talk about like story references and styles, I can see the point of view of saying, you know, it does what it's supposed to do. You know,
Right.
This isn't a Darren Aronofsky story. It's a James Cameron story. It's accessible to everybody.
Exactly.
Yes, and
I put it in
like-
my brain. It has equivalency with movies like RoboCop or, like you said, The Terminator. Like,
Yeah.
it's there to be engaging, but like,
It doesn't challenge you. Like, I can admit, I don't think it needs to challenge you to be good.
Right.
I think what... Sorry, Berg,
that's
go on.
sorry, I was agreeing with you. I apologize. I'm just excited.
No, that's cool. That's me too. I think, you know, like I say, of course, I'll admit, it doesn't really challenge you. It just needs to tap into your emotions. And I think RE2 does that, because
Yes.
it balances this, you know, this heartstring emotion stuff and then the action and suspense, which is all accessible to pretty much anyone over the age of like 9. And the story continuously kind of knocks on your heart and this fear of losing loved ones. And it's got, you know, whereas RE1 used the Umbrella Conspiracy as like the main plot, here in RE2 it's absolutely just a supporting act to, you know, the focus of the breakdown of family and breakdown of personal relationships, you know. And then by the end you've got Leon and Claire and Sherry building new relationships and a new family, sort of, for want of a better phrase. And I just think, man, like the vulnerability of the characters and things, it's so incredible in this game. And I think if you can't latch on to that stuff, you know, you've probably got a heart of stone, because Leon and Claire, strangers thrown together. And guess what? You know, this is a male and female lead in the 90s, and there's not a hint of a love story for these two. They just, they become partners in a hero sense and in not a romantic sense. And, you know, we have Claire, Steve touched on it, Claire and Sherry, and then Leon and Ada, the Birkin family. It's all just so tragic and hopeless. The things that happen, Leon gets shot, like Sherry gets infected, like Steve says. Yeah, even off screen, like Claire and her hunt for Chris. Like, Chris isn't even in the game, but his presence is so strong in the story that, you know, for me, that just kind of, that speaks to the story's strengths. And I think we could, you know, I could talk for another hour about the story, and I won't, but I think for this day, to this day, for all its plaudits, RE2 still doesn't get enough credit for the story. I think it surpasses the original. I don't think there's been a more well-paced, interwoven emotional story in the franchise since. And yeah, it's, I'll wrap it up, sorry.
Yeah, no,
You can hear
that's
myself
fine.
Exciting
going on.
and legible.
Like the ending of Village, I think is emotional, but that's very much in a vacuum. And this game's story plays out, you know, so much more effectively. And kind of in this world where we have people like Kojima and Druckmann trying to balance movies and gameplay, like Resident Evil 2 cracked it first, and it hasn't been surpassed since.
You
the story.
have so perfectly teed up a bunch of things that I want to say.
Sorry, I said a lot, I know.
No, it's fine. Like, there are a bunch of things that I need to certainly dive into myself on that end. Talking about the evolution of RE1, we talked about this before, I think, when we did Villains special, and I talked about how amazing it is that RE2 takes Umbrella and I don't want to say humanizes it, but it places a human story into sort of like the blackest part of its heart. Like, Umbrella at this point has become this out of control beast with rival corporations sort of digging in. They're afraid of the government. They've got paranoid employees. And the family of that paranoid employees, as you said, quite rightfully, right in the middle of all of it. So we get sort of a look into the effect of Umbrella as a corporation on the people that are directly associated with it, which is a massive jump from RE1, which has a great story for what it's worth. It's the same, not in a complaint, but it's the same every time. It's like the core part, you go from A to B in the story. It doesn't really deviate particularly. There's some human parts of it with Barry and stuff like that. But it's, as you quite rightfully said, it's about the conspiracy and it's kind of about the adventure and stuff. Whereas this,
It's about
I mean,
Leon Claire.
you're quite right in talking about it being sort of like a James Cameron film, and obviously it's just dripping with movie references. Steve, you said, it's basically an alien film. It's basically aliens. We've got Terminator in here. We've got all kinds of stuff. But I think you're underselling it somewhat when people say that, and we already made reference to it. It's like I'm playing a film. A film cannot do this. I have not seen a film with, as I count it, 7 or so concurrent plot lines that don't get confusing.
Yeah.
Somehow this game juggles Leon's first day and the tragedy of him coming in, Marvin and all that stuff. You've got Claire and her brother, which obviously trails off quite early on when she realised she's not here. So I'd tie that to Sherry and the breakup with her parents and the fracturing relationship there. You've got Ada and her secret identity and her secret goals. You've got Ben trying and the Umbrella cover-up and Ben trying to undo all that. The RPD is corrupt and Brian Irons is a madman. You've got Birkin's paranoia and the transformation that he goes through as Umbrella swoops in to steal his work. These are all layers that overlap at different points in the game, all put together through all these 4 playthroughs. That's like 7 plot lines.
Yeah.
No film can do that. Like, it's ridiculous. The balancing act of all of this just blows my mind to this day. And not to, poo-poo any other Resident Evil game, but nothing has ever achieved something quite like this.
Agreed.
Like, everything, 4, 5, and 6 for what... Okay, 6 maybe it tried because it was convoluted as balls, but, 4 and 5, great games for what they are.
Very simple.
Again, very straightforward.
Yeah.
You start here, you go through this, you end here. And RE2 has elements of that. By the end of the game, when you're on the train, getting on the train on your B playthrough, you feel like you've gone through miles of stuff from watching Kendo bite it at the beginning. It feels like a massive journey because there's so much stuff going on, though. So much to think about. It's, it's the best story that Resident Evil has ever told for my money, and I don't think it will ever get close to being anywhere like it. And we'll get to characters, and I'll probably say exactly the same thing as well, to be honest.
Always chasing that next dragon.
Sure.
No, I agree. I feel like I may have undersold my opinion. I do think it's a good storyline. I just don't think it. Like I said, I don't think it's groundbreaking because I don't know. When I first played it, I hadn't played any of the other. I didn't play the first one. I definitely hadn't even heard of the first one. So that night I spent grinding away at the police station until I think we maybe got past it once or twice. Given my first opinions on it, I've since gone and played it, and I do think it's good. So that I equated to RoboCop, which was an important movie in my life at the time.
I love RoboCop.
Fair.
I did too. I think, but it's not a very complicated. To me, is I appreciate what the game is and what it is, because it is this big complicated thing is happening, and you've got these multiple characters engaging with it, and how those things overlap, and the more you play it, the more you learn about it. But to me, it's the video game. That's all part of it.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
that's what I was saying earlier. It's it depends on how much you want to get out of it.
Yeah.
All these plot lines that I mentioned really are just serving you enjoying a video game. You don't really have to think too far about the surface level, but you can if you want, and it all connects together and creates this
rewarding.
tapestry. Which, absolutely. Sherwin, how do you feel about the story of RE2?
Yes. No, obviously you guys have said a lot. The story is perfect for what it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't outstay its welcome. It doesn't try to go into unnecessary depth, and in the sense it doesn't try to go. Well, no, actually, no, it doesn't go into unnecessary depth at all. It doesn't. It perfectly supports the level that you want to interact it with. And this is where Resident Evil 2 is a masterclass. Not necessarily in the story itself, in the deployment of how it tells that story. So, if you're someone who wants to go around and completely immerse yourself in the fall of the Raccoon City Police Department, if you're someone who wants to understand exactly how we've got here from Resident Evil 1, if you're someone who wants to understand, what happened next with Chris, and we don't talk about Jill. If you want to have this idea of what's happening with who the new characters are in terms of, hey, is there backstory to why to Leon's first day, that sort of stuff. All of these different things, they're in there if you want to go looking for them. And if you don't, that's fine too. They're not necessary to understand the plot or what's going on. They're not necessary to kind of keep you running through. If you're someone who just wants the raw experience of, I want to go on to the end because I'm scared and I need to be out of this building, or I don't care about reading that stuff because it's just not me. Cool, whatever. Like, the game is perfect in how it slowly deploys that information to you to keep you on edge, to kind of keep you to really kind of sort of slowly unveil itself, much like RE1, where you're sort of unpicking bits and pieces. That's the sort of idea, if you're looking at the cutscenes, it does a really, really good job of introducing multiple characters in that supportive role, who you're actually meeting them for the first time. It's not like, and if you think about Resident Evil 1, I've read this random STARS dude. Okay, but you know why that STARS dude is here. You know, in some sense, you've got a piece of their identity. They're a police officer. They've been sent to do this. You don't need to know anything beyond, okay, so this is Richard. He's a STARS guy. In this case, I've met a random woman in a lab coat. All I know about her is that she has a gun she's pointing it at me and she seems pretty angry about something. That's pretty much it. And, the way that the characters are introduced, and there's no weighty exposition. They literally just give it to you, and then they're moving on from the storyline, and it's literally almost in the same breath. Really, really good example of that Hollywood method of introduction. Terminator 2 is a really good for me, way of thinking about this. It just literally, it's beat, 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 beat. It blasts through. And that's really, really good. Is the story as strong as Resident Evil 1? No. Resident Evil 1 has a far better story than what Resident Evil 2 does. But Resident Evil 2 doesn't need a brilliant story. It just needs to tell a well-paced story and deliver it really well. And that's exactly what it does.
Indeed. Well, we've talked about, the multiple playthroughs. And a big selling point of Resident Evil 2 when it came out was the zapping system. So much so that they gave it this name, which I'll never really understand. I know the zapping is a weird word
marketing
for it.
But it's marketing speak.
Absolutely. So no one said it before.
Yeah, I can't imagine anyone sitting around in an office going, "This is really smart." Like it's marketing, isn't it?
Yes. So the zapping system, the ability to put in whatever disc you'd like to play first, play through the A scenario, and then play through the other side with the other character as the B scenario, and then flip flop and do it the other way as well. Kelsey, how do you feel about the zapping system? Are there any things about it that you do and don't like? Is it a worthy addition, or does it not necessarily pan out for you?
Yeah, it's a worthy addition. I remember being, like you said, not fully understanding it until I sort of played it and got to play scenario B and like seeing what the results of things was. I mean, at the time, it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe that I was leaving the side pack or leaving the submachine gun, just for an example, and stuff like that. And it maybe looks quite sort of simple and basic now looking back, but again, just in the context of the time, and I mentioned the package already of the game, it was a huge selling point. I think that you could say to other people who hadn't played it, and I remember saying to friends, saying, who did you start with? Who did you? Did you know? Yeah. You know, Leon starts on the other side of the truck. You can start there and you can play his mission, and it would just blow their minds, because I think as young children, you're not necessarily always tuned into that stuff, and so you're not aware of the marketing and things like that. So you've got to kind of discover it for yourself. So it blew my mind back then. I mean, maybe these days it's almost something like, it's almost kind of expected these days that games do this sort of stuff and cross over in different ways a bit more. But yeah, the time, I thought it was amazing. And not too much to say, really. Just another great tick for Resident Evil 2.
Steve, how do you feel about the so-called zapping?
I remember, this is a core memory moment, but I remember like poring over the manual going, what's that mean? What does this mean? And honestly, in the context of the greater time, now we know that, things you do in scenario A will affect scenario B. And I wish more games did it. Like, I can only think of a handful of games where what you do in one playthrough can affect another playthrough. Like, you've got your Mass Effect games, obviously Mass Effect 1 leads to 2, leads to 3, but nothing like in its own enclosed ecosystem, quite like this does. And I appreciate it for it, because you can, I wish there was like someone had done a full like list of all the little changes.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure, like I said, item placements can change. I'm pretty sure at least once I've seen the Magnum on, like, for example, the secretary's desk in the main hall in scenario 2 for Leon, so I have no idea how that occurs.
When I played recently, I had the grenade launcher there. I don't know how common that is for Claire B, but it was, in the main hall, which actually took me back. I'm not used to playing Claire B, though, so it might be normal.
Well, there's all these little weird things. Obviously, now we're big super nerds and go, so if I pick up this ammo pack here, does that mean that changes that there? As a kid, like, it's just this novel thing where one leads into the other and you see the other half of the story. But even then, seeing a slightly skewed version of the same story, but with like a bigger, badder ending and a new like throwback to the previous game's big bad enemy walking around is cool.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of wish there was more to it now, though. Like, literally, if it went that nitty gritty of like if Leon cleared an office out on playthrough A, then on playthrough B there should be nothing there. But that would probably make for a very boring game now, wouldn't it?
I suppose so, but there are certainly, I think there's ways you probably could have done something with it. I felt like, that's probably a podcast for another day about another game. Where
just one I learned this past while. If you leave Marvin alive in scenario A, he's technically still around in B.
Yeah, he is, yeah. You just walk in and he's already a zombie. It's neat. I had one, so I kind of alluded to it there, where I played through the game this week. Leon A, Claire B, which I don't usually do for a few reasons. But I did it because it was kind of a way to stop myself from rushing through the game, as I'm known to do. I think famously I've talked about it several times. I just basically play Claire A over and over and over and over again. And if I tell myself I'm going to play at a normal speed, it just doesn't pan out, and I see how fast I can go. So I did Leon A and Claire B to give myself an excuse to see stuff I'd never seen before, or rather hadn't seen in a very long time, and I made sure to go everywhere. As in Claire B, I didn't realise this was a thing. If you go down to the cells, you can find Ben's dead body after he's been ripped apart. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. His corpse is just lying there. Some of it doesn't quite match up. I thought it was quite funny. Claire comes across Leon wounded and then races off and leaves him behind in that corridor. And then somehow he gets to the lab before she does. Like, all the cable car has been done, which I thought, that's a little weird, but there you go. So there are things that there are some things that don't match up like that, and there are some things that I feel like are better in some way rounds than the other, obviously. I'm a big proponent of Claire A, Leon B, because the other way around, you don't get Leon and Sherry interacting at all. We lose a lot of the Birkin and G-Virus antidote stuff and that kind of thing. So I certainly have my preference, but as a concept, I agree. It's amazing, and it's a shame that certain remakes didn't actually do it properly, but there you go. Sherwin, how do you feel about the zapping system?
It's flawed genius. So this is, again, in the grand scheme of things, you think the puzzles are crap. Berger hates a story. I think, I'm just going to burn you both with that now. I think, for me, the concept is amazing, and the execution at the end, in terms of the extended ending part, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And this is something which is game defining. Before this, no one had done it. And exactly as you said, I think it was you, KDB, said this is just everyone does this now. Of course they do, because they've played this and they're like, this is absolutely brilliant. Why are we not doing this? The parts where it doesn't work are the lack of continuity between the two. I feel like if you and I can forgive the original Resident Evil for this, because it's very much something where it's a PlayStation game ultimately. Like, I can't even begin to imagine the amount of time frame. Think of like a game now. You put it out, okay, that part wasn't right, we'll just patch it and the job is done. Now you had this game that had to come out in its physical form exactly as it was, had to be perfect, and that's literally what it was. I can't even begin to imagine how much more intensive development was, and how much less space you had to work with on that disc and so on to actually achieve what you need to do and so forth. So especially when you've already started making the game and then scrapped it at like 80% or whatever else, and then have to get the thing out. So I can totally get with it, why it happened. That for me is a failing of Resident Evil 2 remake, because ultimately it feels wrong that I'm playing it and I have to go get the valve and then blow open the water gas. Yeah, the blow open the water thing again, because I've already done that once. So why is it not already done the second time I go there? Why, if the tyrant falls through the ceiling and it blocks the way to the door, is the door not blocked in my A playthrough at some point? Like, stuff like that is the bit where it feels like there's so many small nods, exactly as you guys were saying. Oh, Marvin's actually there wandering around as a zombie, or kind of, yeah, you see a corpse laying there because that person died in this playthrough. Yeah, they're great, but there's lots of small bits that aren't there, and those are the parts where I feel like if I'm doing the puzzle twice, you know, that sort of stuff falls down for me. It would be better if you had puzzles that just were not accessible for whatever reason, that you could then do. All that it would take is that, and at that point, it's literally perfect. But otherwise, in terms of the actual concept itself, yeah, really, really, really solid.
I mean,
it's
we
the sort of
established
thing-
they're sleeping on the floor, these devs. Let's give them a break.
Yeah, exactly. It, right? And no, I can be very forgiving of that. I think it's the
I
sort of
agree with
thing
you.
where someone sat down and suggested this, and it's that one of those wonderful ideas where someone went, "My God,
We've got to do
how
that.
how have we never thought of this before? It's amazing." And ever since, like, you know, as soon as you say it, it's like, well, yeah, every game should be that way because it's an incredible idea, and how much more immersive is that? But, you know, it's, you know, how much extra does it give to your game for in terms of the development and everything else? Like, doubles the length of your game, fantastic. But it's just those small parts where I imagine it's time is the biggest issue or anything else. But
Yeah.
there we are.
Yes, it's hard to disagree with that, certainly. Like, just more of it would have been great, really, and just tighten everything up. It's yeah, you're right, it might be a time thing, could be a balance thing, trying to make sure they get everything right. But yeah, it's almost like a taster of something that could have been perfect. Well, sadly, didn't quite get there, but there you go.
Well, there's got to
Berger,
be a
how do you feel
first,
about-
right? There's got to be a first
Right.
time anyone does
Well,
anything,
no,
so-
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Berger, how do you feel about zappings?
I think I agree with Sherman. It's genius. It like when I think of the zapping interactions that speak to me, it's the capacity to pick which hallway in the B playthrough gets flooded with zombies by
Right.
closing the shutters on the one side.
Yeah.
And then, like, that was so cool to me. Like, going through again on the other side of this, and then being able to go through that hallway and have it be a generally safe corridor, except it's not, was cool. But yeah, the parts where it didn't work were super not great. I'm bummed it never really caught on, and I was thinking of other games that I can recall having a similar style of interaction. And the only thing I'm casting for and coming back something is a game on the Super Nintendo called Blackthorn, which had a password system where, like, it would generate a password when you entered a new area. Depending on, like, what weapon upgrades you got in the past as you went through the game.
Yeah.
So it's the only thing I could think of that's even kind of remotely close to this style at that time. Or I mean, I'm having a hard time casting something that does the same thing.
And I say, talking RPGs, like, the only thing I can think of that comes close to the zapping system, really, if you want to go into the weeds, is maybe the way Chrono Trigger figures out your, like, crimes. Spoilers, you get put on trial in Chrono Trigger. And in the Sega Mega Drive RPG, it's kind of a big deal, actually, in that one. The Sega Mega Drive RPG, Jesus.
Witcher 3 does it as well. You can carry over your save from The Witcher 2.
Yeah,
Well, it's not the same. That's
Phantasy
not the
Star
same
3.
thing.
Oh, Fantasy Star. Oh, that's a series,
Phantasy
that is.
Star 3, the whole point of it was it was a shipping simulator to a degree. Whoever got with who would develop the progeny, the next part of the campaign. So it had effects, like, not zapping system, obviously, because it was one big adventure, but it was like in chunks, so you could, like, do each generation. God, that was a hard brain fart to get out.
Well, you did it now, so we're all proud of you.
Operation report, September 27th, 1 p.m. The west barricade has been broken through, and another exchange ensued. We sheltered the injured in the confiscation room on the first floor temporarily. 12 more people were injured in the battle. Recorder, David Ford. Additional report. 3 additional people were killed following the sudden appearance of an as-of-yet unknown creature. This creature is identified by missing patches of skin and razor-like claws. However, its most distinguishing characteristic is its lance-like tongue, capable of piercing a human torso in an instant. Their numbers as well as their location remains unknown. We have tentatively named this creature the Licker, and are currently in the process of developing countermeasures to deal with this new threat. Recorder, David Ford.
We talked about the story, we talked about the multiple playthroughs, and I did promise we were going to talk about characters. I think it's probably quite important to do it because, as I sort of alluded to, Resident Evil 2 sets up multiple important characters for the rest of the franchise. Also importantly, whilst we've got the mention of Chris, he's not in the game. So we've got like an entirely brand new cast of characters as well, which is quite a bold risk, really. I mean, I know originally 1.5 was going to take even more of a departure by not even really referencing Chris. But even still, to have an entirely brand new cast that takes place not just in the same world, but, you know, characters that have directly interacted with the characters we know. We just haven't seen it, like Irons. RE2 has a stacked cast of characters that is pretty beloved in general. Sherwin, any thoughts on the cast of characters, people that stood out to you for better or for worse in RE2?
I mean, I preferred the 1.5 version of Brian Irons. I liked him
Good guy,
a
Brian.
lot more. Yeah, I like Good Guy Brian a lot more. Brian Irons feels a touch forced. I get, you need a bad guy. It fits. I don't really care much for Claire Redfield. I'm very much aware of who I'm talking to when I say that. This is probably my last podcast appearance, everyone. I'm not a big Claire Redfield fan. I find she's not like Chris. She's not like her brother, where he's not the most bland character ever conceived. But she just falls into that. Okay, I'm Den Mother. So quickly. Like, it's literally, I'll arrive and I'm kind of looking after Leon, who is, let's be honest, like, he's a 16-year-old child. And as soon as I see Sherry, I'm like really mumsy. And now I'm trying to save like this little girl, and that's the primary thing that is my sole purpose in life. Because apparently, admittedly, she found out about her brother pretty early on, but like, that is a really interesting point where it would have been nice to see more about who Claire is as a character. Maybe maybe you could argue she just kind of fits into that. I don't know. I just felt both of the female characters, none of them feel particularly satisfying in terms of they have very good writing for who they are. Ada is possibly the most frustrating character in the entire series.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah.
It will be back with that one.
Annette works because she's the reason why social services exist. She's literally like she's insulated by the story arc of who she is. Claire just feels really, she's not Redfield bland. She's just underdeveloped, I guess. I mean, off the other characters, they kind of fit. Like, Leon has his own charm to him. I mean, it's interesting how he completely evolves after this game to be something else entirely, but that's neither here nor there. The rest of them fill their roles very well. It's difficult to kind of zoom too much into what the characters do, purely beyond what we said, because exactly like Keddy was talking about, we're not delving into War and Peace or a classic here. We are literally we have action movie characters. They literally do the job that they do their job. They have their key moments. They're there to further the plot or further the action. They're not really there to do an awful lot more. And I think it's more so much the fact that so many of them go on to really be characters that people really resonate with or found extra kind of development. Plotline is, I'd almost say, is because of the meta stories that appeared between them and whatever release they were next seen in. or whatever legacy they had in future games, not necessarily for the reasons why you saw them here and you went, I really love that character. They speak to me because they are XYZ, or they did XYZ, or there's nothing here where you would look at these characters and go, that's my new role model. None of them are Barry Byrne. Not a single one of them are Barry Byrne. And literally that's it, really.
Okay, I'll get mine out of the way then, I suppose. Yeah, do you know, to a certain extent I can see what you're saying about Claire a little bit. It helps.
You don't have to agree.
No, but I don't agree. I think in retrospect, the fact that we know for a fact that she and Chris are orphans is obviously a big factor into why she fits into the role that she does. And there are some comparisons. So she shares a very similar space that another important video game character does, in that she and Samus are essentially Ripley from Aliens proxies. Or at least they are what Metroid creator Sakamoto wants Samus to be. Bearing in mind that Nintendo don't know what a bounty hunter actually is. So when they used that for Samus and they just thought it sounded cool, they actually think she's like this helper hero lady who's really cool to everyone. And as of Other M, the baby is her entire personality, which is a big letdown and not really who Samus is supposed to be. This is what Samus is supposed to be. Claire Redfield pulls it off in her first game immediately. She is that kind-hearted badass who has the ability to be maternal, but for me, without turning her entire value into I am a childminder. She manages to ride the line of being protective and motherly, which is not a negative trait at all, but also she wields a gigantic pipe that shoots acid and fire, and she has action lady one-liners. Yeah, she perfectly rides this line. She's probably... No, there's no probably. She's far and away the coolest character in the game, easily. Ada is fine in Resident Evil 2. She's not annoying like her later counterparts. She's kind of cool, but not on Claire's level. Leon, the charming idiot, I love him in RE2, honestly. And I think we said before, when we did the Sherry episode, good job on Sherry on managing to be a kid character that actually matters to the story and isn't annoying, in my opinion. I never found her to be particularly jarring. And also, I'm going to flip-flop on Irons as well. I love horrible evil villain Irons. He's the most hateable POS villain of all time. He's just dripping with, you know, ham. He's so quotable. I love him. He's ridiculous. Which is good because you need a villain, and he's a temporary villain because Birkin obviously a lot more tragic. And he's not like the sort of villain that gives the big speech, unlike Iron, so it's cool to have that in there as like a stopgap, as it were. Everyone in this game is pretty great, but yeah, everyone already knows how I feel about Claire Redfield, I guess. Steve, how do you feel about the cast of characters of RE2?
I have like massive nostalgia for him. We've got to remember this. I feel like the actual ensemble as a whole are probably... This is where the PlayStation almost starts getting its groove with regards like getting storytelling and voice acting mesh. This feels like somewhere between not quite extreme, hardcore, adult anime that's all ultra-violent, but also a bit more above like Power Rangers and X-Men in terms of trying to keep you engaged with fictional characters. I really like most of the cast. I think the only handful that let me down are like, you know, Marvin in this is woefully underused and just as a I will exposit about the previous game and then die. Yeah, fair. You know, it's a bit rubbish. And obviously Kendo, the man, the meme, the legend, is a meme in this game for a reason. He gets one line, gets bit. You know, they're a bit wonky and would get improved upon in later iterations. That said, Clueless Burke Leon, I love him. You know, the man who no one ever listens to because he's never got anything useful to say. Claire, I think Ripley is probably the best comparison. It's like Ripley without the trauma or the guilt of having lost everybody. You know, so she's just an action badass and she's cool at it. Ada's neat. She's cool, collected. Annette, in every campaign, at some point says, "You've murdered my husband." Is a little bit one note in that regard, but does have some stuff regarding her daughter that's a bit more compelling. You know, in Leon's campaign, it's not so much there. It's just, you murdered my husband. Also, the G virus is really special. I'm dead now.
Spoilers,
I've shot
Steve.
Ada.
Spoilers.
Spoilers for a 25-year-old game. Although she does, like, she has some of the most terrifying deliveries. Like in that FMV where she recounts Punk's thing, you know, the G virus will revitalize all cellular functions. Just rolls in my head. It's like, that's amazing. And then she says, you murdered my husband. Another 40 times. It's okay. Sherry's fine. Ben, I think, is more compelling in this one, bless him, but he gets murked still rather quick. Yeah, but as the snarky git in the cell who thinks he's safe, as opposed to some creep with a cigarette going on, like you know, just trying to smooth Leon. It's just a git. I like a git in a prison cell, and then he died. So yes, I think as an ensemble, generally very strong, but the leads are the ones that take it. The side characters, Ada and Sherry, are both fine, and the villains are a bit hokey.
Fair. Berger, how do you feel about the cast of characters for Resident Evil 2?
I think they're great. I think they serve their function as Steve says, an ensemble. They serve their function well as 80s movie characters. 80s, 90s movie characters of like you said, the Ellen Ripley, the charming himbo, the Mel Gibson like type of charming himbo. Sherry is especially for a game made in 1998. Sherry is a very compelling child character. I also like evil Brian. So I'm afraid you'll have to die kind of a mentality that he has. It's almost served well by its like dated and kind of bad voice acting more than the more other iterations of Irons. I think I like classic Irons over new Irons. Ultimately speaking, I think they're all pretty cool. Leon is obviously great for what he becomes in the series. Claire, I love Claire. I love Claire in every iteration I see her. I think seeing where she becomes in later versions of the game or later games is she's awesome.
Katie B, thoughts on the characters? And also, whilst you're there, we might as well roll into BOWs as well.
Sure. So, Irons, I mean, I agree. Great villain. He was literally going to turn the mayor's daughter into like a stuffed trophy.
Absolutely.
That is horrific.
That's weird. That's a bit weird.
So
he is a bit weird.
That's the whole point.
So yeah, he's terrifying. Irons in the remake is good as well, but yeah, I like this one. Claire, as a child, I mean, and now, like, just absolutely in love with everything about her. I think I do take Sherwin's points. I really, really do. I think for me, like, sensitivity is like such a big winning trait, and the fact that when you first see Claire, she's like riding a motorbike, she's got biker gear on, she's like super badass, and then it's like she's not just like an arrogant prick. She's just cool. She's super cool, and she can be sensitive. And when it comes to her and Sherry and her and Chris, she has a bow gun, which looks super cool as well. So I love Claire, and yeah, I'm definitely a Claire supporter, like you, Si, and you, Bergs, as well.
Everybody other than me, basically, on this podcast.
Noted Claire hater, Sherwin Matthews.
That's fine. I'm just a Redfield hater. I'm equal opportunities Redfield hater. That's fine.
I take the point. You think, oh, okay, she's just going to be the mother character. I get it. I think the story around it is good enough that actually it's fine with me. So it's fine with me. But I do take the point. I actually, not to promote anybody else, I did a whole podcast with somebody else about Annette Birkin as well. I think she's a really strong character.
What do you mean not to go? Say the podcast name.
The podcast is Pixel People. It's a podcast about NPCs and their stories and stuff like that.
Sounds like a cool
I did
podcast.
A very long chat about Annette, so I'm a
great.
big fan of
I
Annette.
enjoyed it.
But I'm not going to recap that here. Just go listen to that. I think Leon, even as a child playing this game, I was just like, why is this guy such an idiot? I remember thinking, why do you care about all these police rules and stuff when all this is going down, like just let it go. He's
It's
like,
his first day.
Yeah, especially
been
when
trained.
especially when he's such a good police officer, he can't even get the uniform right.
yeah, it always kind of made me a bit sad for him. But I do, I like him, and and I think particularly with his second scenario, he grew on me more. He keeps the cool head, which I suppose you can give him credit for. Sherwin is right. There is no Barry Burton in this game. There isn't. There isn't a character like that. But this is where I think Claire wins. Like, whereas I love Barry and he's my favourite, I guess, in the first. Like, I came to love Jill, I think, later. But everyone loves Barry. There's no Barry in this game, so Claire, she's number one for me in this game. I think the Ada stuff. Ada feels far more like a plot device than a fleshed out character for me. She's fine, she's cool, like, I thought she was kind of cool as well, but I just think I would have liked to get more personality from her. That one of her big winning points, I suppose, is she does link back to the first game, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, fair.
Which is like a nice little nod. I don't have too much else to say about the characters. I think it is amazing when you say, Si, that they're all new. It's a sequel, and there's no one from the first game in it. Like, I did know that, but it's just when you stop and think about that, it's such a risk. And to come out with characters like Claire and Leon, whatever you think of him, it's incredible. And I think we touched on the layers to the stories and all the different plots going on. It's all character driven. It's these characters. The zombies are kind of, and the conspiracy is a backdrop. Umbrella is a backdrop in this, and the virus, it's all, that's plot devices. The stuff with Sherry and Leon and Ada and Claire and the Birkin family, as I've said, all this character stuff, love it. Great cast of characters. Great ensemble. Big thumbs up.
What do you think of the BOWs?
Yes, so BOWs. Now, I know... So, first of all, loads of zombies, right? There's so many zombies in this game, which is incredible. Like, from a technical standpoint, and then just, from a gameplay standpoint, that's really good. And they're all presented well. There's nice variations, even though there is repetition on the zombies. But that doesn't really bother me, because some of them look so cool. There's iconic zombies, and that they all that have stuck with us from this game. There's key art for the game with those iconic zombies. The police officer and the tank top zombie with the denim shorts on. So they look great. And although the liquor is overused to this point, I cannot think, you just can't argue that it's just one of the most iconic monster creations of all time. And what this game does with like the pixels that it has to create these monsters is just... it's so good. And there's such a diversity in the BOWs, with the liquors, the different types of liquors, with the plants, with the moth, the spiders, the dogs, all these different versions of Birkin. You could maybe excuse the giant train blob because it's just a blob and it comes a bit sort of ridiculous at that point. But you think of what's the one, I guess it's his second one, when he's when you go down on the train lift, like that Birkin for me, this towering giant Machamp style Birkin is just he's so hench and demonic, and in this like unconventional boss arena as well, where it's just like a U shape, or it's barely even a U, it's like one line with two little ends, and I love that so much. So the dog Birkin is also great as well. And it's weird, it's crazy to think they got so much into this PS1 game with the variations on the BOWs, and I'm probably even forgetting some, but they often look terrifying. And Mr. X as well, just used to scare the absolute shit out of me. And I'm rambling a bit, but they look great. And we've touched on just diversity of BOWs. There's so many of them in here, and they all do different things. And
special shout out to the moth.
Yes.
The moth, which wasn't in the remake. God's sake.
Which is truly pointless, because what it does, why it's there, no one really knows, no one really explains it, but it feels so wonderful that it is in there. It's like the derpy guy that's trapped in one of the rooms.
I love it because I was thinking about it when I was playing through recently. I would have to like bring up the old encyclopedia or whatever from our good friends at ResidentEvilPodcast.com and look at the mythology. But like that thing makes its nest in Birkin's lab sometime between him going down in the sewer and being infected and the game, which is like a week or something, I think. So it just like turns that room into its its little domicile at some point in that week, which I just thought was really funny. It was really great. Yeah, the most adorable BOW of all time. Praise them off. Sherwin, how do you feel about the creature roster?
I mean, obviously, we already spoke about them off. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good. I definitely echo you, KDB, in terms of the liquor. There's the ongoing question of what's more iconic for Resident Evil, hunters or liquors, and arguably it's the liquor, which is really impressive. Like, you know, it stands up against something which has more appearances and is something, you know, if you look at different varieties of it as different stuff, and with the exception of one of the hunters, it's probably cooler. Because it's never going to be the Frog Boys. But the point is that, in terms of the volume of different types of zombie, yeah, that's fine. But you know that they're different. It's fine there are so many different zombies, or it's fine. Sorry, there are so many zombies in the game because they are the constant. They are ultimately the story itself. That's the whole point of it. And zombies can be, you know. Yes, they're the most basic enemy, but in a survival horror game, depending on where you are with your ammunition or whatever else, maybe they're the perfect thing you need to just run away from. That's the key thing. Like, the only thing you could really do to the zombies to make them more of a threat is exactly what Remake does, which is introduce Crimson Heads. So it is something which works really, really, really well. In terms of, yeah, especially when you start thinking about the liquor, and then you have evolved liquors, obviously, different bits and pieces like that. The way that they sort of even find ways of stepping up, same with the zombies and the naked zombies, the way they step up the actual enemies as well into more advanced versions. You know, they're very subtle, but they work very effectively. I can definitely remember the first time I encountered the poison ivies. I can very much remember the first time I encountered the evolved liquor and went, huh, that's not cool. Don't like that. That's changed. I was kind of happy when they didn't have giant scythes on their arms. Different ideas like that. There's lots of different ways they introduce stuff. I love what they did. We talked about this obviously in Tier Death Experience. I love the change in the Tyrant. It's like they took the Tyrant and went, right, so what's the next evolution of this thing? And the next evolution of this thing is a Pursuer. It is something which is with you for the entire game. It becomes a much more iconic piece of what the game is. And you know, it's not anywhere near done as effectively as what obviously Remake did, but it changes the face of how you interact with that particular enemy type, which is really, really cool. You know, old Billy B, he's okay. Like I never really found myself too drawn into what was going on with Birkin. Interestingly, playing the game, their focus was always more on the actual overarching story for me. But I agree with you, KDB. Some of those designs are absolutely incredible. They're certainly very... Like, if you think about... A different way of looking at it. If you think about the roster of Resident Evil 2 enemies, all of them have very distinct silhouettes. All of them have very different constructs, colour schemes, whatever else you want to look at them. They're all instantly identifiable as what it is I'm fighting, what it is, you know, it moves and, you know, I have to deal with it in different ways. You can instantly identify with it. You can instantly understand what this creature is in terms of how it moves and so on. There's never that point where it's a grey area where you look at it and go, can't quite work out what that is. There's no wibbly wobbly leech men, which are just kind of like, that's bad design for whatever reason, because I can't really work out what it is I'm trying to deal with here, or it just looks like a mess of pixels. They all look solid, and for me, that's perfect. Like, yeah, that's G1 Transformers. It's just perfect design.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I find it hard for RE2 to compete with RE1's roster of enemies by virtue of RE1 coming first and being able to go, let's just take all the scariest animals, things that people are most frightened of, and just make them giant. Like giant snake, giant shark, giant spider, so on and so forth. Right, yeah, absolutely. Terrifying. But like, I mean, I get you can also take the dog points on it because it really is just a bunch of giant animals for the most part. So it kind of evens out in that way. RE2, it feels in the same way we're talking about puzzles. It feels lesser, but it also doesn't feel like anything's missing particularly. Maybe I would have chucked something new in at the lab to really throw you off instead of an evolved liquor. Personally,
Well, you've got Ivies.
yeah, the Ivies are cool, but I don't know, I could sort of take them or leave them. They're okay. For me, it's like when you look at 1.5 and they have the zombie horses and the zombie apes, that's kind of sort of boring. It's like that's kind of, you're looking at RE1 and just following the same theme. Let's just take an animal and make it a zombie version or a bigger version. Really, I think if RE2 was missing an enemy, and I think it's perfectly fine without it, I really do kind of miss the old man spider. That thing's terrifying. But there you go. That's just me. Steve, how do you feel about the POWs?
As much as I will attest, I'm a hunter guy, overall, and the liquors are overused in the movies and everything else.
Right.
I think they are perfect where they are in this one.
Yep.
I think the entire enemy roster is, for a game that is literally set in a city overrun with zombies, of course you should have a shed load of zombie skins and have a shed load of zombies everywhere. That meshes well with the whole zombie apocalypse aesthetic. The stages of Birkin's transformation always reminds me of the film The Fly, and the way that Seth Brundle slowly becomes this horrible mutant, at least in the remake of The Fly. And I love it. With each skin he drops off, it becomes something vastly more grotesque and less human. Let's go.
Yeah.
Every iterative, new thing, for example, like the Tyrant being the iteration of TO2, TO103, fantastic. I love the idea, except for maybe that the coat is his power limiter. I think that's always been stupid. Fight me. Limiter coats are dumb.
And if
Can
you
we
beat,
just have
and if you beat Steve, then you have to fight me afterwards.
yeah. Some other cockamamie reason. I don't care what, but a powered coat is stupid. Right. IVs, I actually feel like this is one where they improved on it in the remake, because in this they are just plant things. They're the Triffids, cool. Admittedly, it's better than just vines right around a zombie, but the lethal instant death threat and falling from the ceiling, they do more with them in the remake. I am on Team Man-Spider in regards to a new enemy in the lab. I would have thought that would have been the perfect cap-off. That being said, the moth is very much a callback to RE1 in my eyes, as we've already said. It's just a big bug. It's a big thing, which is before Resident Evil 0 ran that right to the ground.
Right, yeah.
It's weird, though, when you think about it, because you look at the scope of where Raccoon City goes from here, and how it's used in so many other entries, and how much of a diverse, crazy ecosystem that city truly has at this point. We got off lucky. and it still works pretty well, mainly because of the starring villain just changing shape every time you meet him.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's also an alligator, I suppose, that's there, and that's an encounter that happens. No one's talked about G-Adult. I kind of like G-Adult. Anyone else like G-Adult?
I really love the concept of this being like the failed mutation. Like it's G has tried to find a new host and it's failed, and this is an abomination that you have to fight that's like vomiting up bugs.
It's so
and stuff.
creepy.
It's disgusting. I love it. It fits so perfectly.
Yeah, it's like the facehugger if the facehugger popped out of a body and then did its own thing afterwards.
Yeah, and yeah, for sure. Yeah. Bergs, how do you feel about the creature roster in RE2?
I don't think it's much of a contest in terms of which is the more iconic Resident Evil monster, because I do think it's the liquor. And I say that not only because I'm thinking back and I haven't seen the movies in a while, but I don't think they put a hunter in the movies.
No.
The liquor's in the movies, like all of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I asked folks who, like, just chatting in anticipation for today, if folks had played Resident Evil 2 before, and if they had anything that they wanted, like any memories that stuck out to them from that experience. And to a T, every single one of them was like, I remember seeing this thing fall off the ceiling of a hallway, and it was absolutely terrifying. And these are people who like also followed up my question with, yeah, it wasn't really my thing though. But
It's still stuck with them.
yeah. Because like we talked about earlier, that happens pretty early in the game. So
Yeah, for sure.
almost everybody can get that on a run. before giving up on the game. I do think the escalation of monsters is fun. I mentioned that earlier. One of the things I really find really satisfying about Resident Evil 2 is how the more disbelief it asks you just to spend, the more it rewards you.
Yeah.
And like upon reflection of the series as a whole, I think the IVs are cool because they are an iteration on something else that you saw in the first one too. Like, you get the impression of having how this game ultimately rewards you in that way. Again, for having played the first one, because there's some deep cut references. Like they saw the plant stuff and were like, okay, cool, let's keep experimenting on that. And so that's another further iteration on something where they saw scientific benefit there and explored it more. The moth is cool. I think it's one of those things where I imagine they thought it was going to be more cool as they were designing it, and then like looked up what moths do, and they're like, oh well, that's
they spin silk.
They just kind of hang out.
Leon just walks in with a light, puts it
You
down.
know, and that's it. You're almost putting it out of its misery. The genre of monsters. So many monsters from that game you can see the smoker in Left 4 Dead is obviously like the fact that it uses its tongue and leaps around. Just to name one, any enemy in terms of its like behavior as an enemy too, like they were all different. Fascinating experience wandering into Birkin, and then depending on which, like, because you might run into different Birkins. And I think how they introduce that and unfold it as you play more of it is great.
If I had any complaints, I'm going to do this. Right, it's the way that you actually engage. Birkin is a visual concept and what he looks like, and the fact that he's got a story, a monster with a story is always more compelling than one without one. Is great, but the fights themselves kind of stand back, take a few steps, shoot. It's not evolved mechanically.
Resident Evil and boss fights have never really...
Exactly what you're about to say. The worst part of Resident Evil is the boss fights. Always has been, always will be. It's just what it is. Like, it's impressive where the series has managed to get to with some of the remakes and some of the other ideas that it had. To kind of, to land where we are. And ultimately, if you're looking at this original run of 3 games, that's why the Tyrant and Nemesis are so interesting. But
Indeed. Okay, so let's arrive at the sort of final portion, which is aesthetics. Let's talk about the visuals for Resident Evil 2. Keeping in mind, it's a 25-year-old game, of course, but just a simple sentence to start with. I personally think that the pre-rendered backgrounds in this game still look amazing.
Absolutely incredible.
Bergs, how do you feel about the visual design of RE2?
I love it. Oh my goodness! I was playing the game last night for about 4.5 hours, and just the storytelling in the visual of the world is great, because like how you can like walk down a hallway and the game is telling you that hallway is not important. How do you know that's not important as a player? Is because instead of a doorway there, it's just barricaded. Thrown about the hallways, it looks like a place that is very quickly like it feels like a police station might, right? It's just the opening few tiles of that game. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, for sure.
Jesus, that opening scene of Resident Evil 2 is so iconic in my brain that like I can envision just that single scene on like 6 platforms, including the Tiger Electronics Resident Evil 2 game. Was that first scene? Like that was the background.
Special shout out to that. That's, you can say what you want about that, but that opening segment, especially in the gun shop, captures the desolation of Raccoon City, that version of the game, so perfectly. It's just silence and just nothing there. It just feels so eerie. Anyway, back to the main game itself, but I really want to shout that out because it does capture that sense so very, very well.
It really would be fun to do a podcast on that version at some point, but we'll certainly loop back around to that.
I think that the way the graphics are and the time they came out still kind of hold up for other games in that time. I'm having a hard time finding anything visually I don't like about it. There's a couple small things I think are really cool that the game does. in that when you're walking by a zombie that's not quite dead, Leon will like look down at it as you walk past.
Yeah, sure. Helpful. That's a helpful
little
thing
tip.
does.
I did note a visual thing that I thought was interesting as I was playing it. The soda machine. I played the director's cut. The DualShock version of the game, and the soda machines are blank in the police station, which I hadn't realized that they had done. Which I thought was.
Oh,
I know that there was.
That's because of the sponsorship, isn't it? That got pulled out in the end.
Yeah, there's definitely been some stuff with that. Yeah,
I believe that was supposed to be Pepsi originally.
It was Pepsi in 1.5, and I think it was
Sprite
something
or
else,
7-Up?
and they changed it to Coca Soda
Yeah,
and all that.
so
It's a whole bizarre
I
thing.
understood it to be that the logo that was on there was close enough that Coca-Cola found it objectionable.
I think that's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I said, the whole game's pre-rendered cuts, like backgrounds, are all so good. And to this day, they still look great.
Yep.
For sure.
Awesome.
There is something to be said about character over realism to a certain extent. Like, it's kind of the RPD in particular is kind of a ludicrous location. It's pretty much function before logic, where it's like, oh, it's kind of like a mansion, but it's not. It's a police station. It's weird and kooky, and the backstory is it was a museum. Sure, that'll do. And I actually, do you know what? That might seem silly, but it definitely serves just for a better game because of it. And Remake did some alterations that were great. I think Remake's RPD is really, really cool, and it suits the game, and the more realism they put it in, the tweaks they did were really, really good. But classic RPD, yeah, like, it's just got so much character. Like, the whole game is, but, you know, obviously the RPG is the sort of center point of the game. It's got so much character in it, not just environmental storytelling, but just as a location is just... Yeah, I love that place. It's so iconic to me that I tried to build it in Minecraft multiple times before I was like, the geography of this is kind of questionable. Like, it doesn't actually snap together how you think it should. But there you go. Kelsey, how do you feel about the visuals for RE2?
Oh my god! I mean, you know, you said, oh, it's 25 years old. It just doesn't matter. Like everything, like you've said and Berg said, I agree with. It looks incredible. This game is just, if there's ever an argument to do new games with pre-rendered backgrounds, it's here as well. You know, this... funnily enough, so Sherwin said something on the Code Veronica podcast, which has always stuck with me. And because, you know, Code Veronica was the game that sort of made, excluding Survivor, like made a jump to either no pre-rendered backgrounds or very few pre-rendered backgrounds. And Sherwin said how you just lose the storytelling and the detail that you get in these games in, you know, 1, 2 and 3, and it's completely right, because it doesn't matter that this game is old as it is as old as it is, because all the story is there. It looks so good to this day. It's like an insanely good magic trick. Like they had tech limitations, and, you know, this is what they've done to deal with it, and then you end up with this almost timeless video game here. And it's hard to even pick a favourite area because most of it just looks so damn good. Star's office, Chief Irons' office, the labs, giant walkways, the frozen room as you're walking up to it, and the ice leaking out of the room. There is just countless points in the game where the pre-rendered backgrounds sell the idea to you, and that's why this game's so effective. Because if they were 3D, blocky 3D, it just I don't think it would work, to be honest. The storytelling wouldn't be there. And
yeah,
you know, these days lighting in modern games is such a big part of creating atmosphere, whereas like back in 1998 your options are kind of like turn light on or turn light off, and
Maybe.
you know, which means they were so limited on what they can do, which is, to me, is why the environments and the visuals that it paints is all the more impressive. Even over things like Silent Hill, I think sometimes looks very video gamey compared to, you know, Resident Evil 2. And, you know, modern gaming can blow me away sometimes with its lighting and stuff, but there's something about this that's you're walking through paintings and there's no gaps. You know, the attention to detail, it's all considered. And I just think that, yeah, I can't sing its praises enough. You could I say if you want to pick some weak areas, there's maybe a couple of rooms that are a bit bland. Like I think the extra areas you go with Sherry and Ada don't have too much going on in them. But again, I'm just being picky here to try and make myself not sound biased, because the environments are gorgeous, and then even like just the weapon designs and everything in the inventory, it has a bright color palette as well. You know, horror games can generally make stuff quite dreary and brown and dark, and I've been critical of the remake for stuff like that, but here it doesn't need to be. It's bursting with color and it uses the dark tones well when it needs to. And then even the character models, you know, these expressionless, they have no fingers, and but you know, the way they move, it's like they're like stop motion, and stop motion is just as effective as Pixar. You know, it doesn't matter that the character models look the way they do, because everything's so well done. They sit in the environment so well because of the storytelling, and I think the performances help the character models as well, which we'll maybe touch on a bit in a minute. But yeah, just huge thumbs up. It's stood the test of time, 25 years, and these pre-rendered backgrounds really sell every single idea that the game is trying to give you. And yeah, you can't, I can't fault it. I really can't.
I would be very interested in a way to get someone who's never played RE2 before to sit down with the game. Like, when you say the Stars Office, if I was playing this game for the first time, I would spend so much time in that room. There's so much to look at and just sort of take in. Aside, like, obviously on top of that, the fact that it's like, oh, this is Barry's desk, you can tell, because it's got weapons here, and oh, Chris's jacket in the back and that kind of stuff. But like, even if these were just total strangers, like all these little things littered around to sort of take in, was really interesting to me. But yeah, I think the only location that really suffers visually is the sewer, I guess. But sewers are kind of boring in every game. I don't think there's any game that's made a sewer particularly interesting, really. But beyond that, even the major locations like the RPD and like the lab, maybe the lab lesser, especially the RPD. Every hallway is interesting to me. Yeah. Like the hallway outside the Stars office is just like a big grey hallway, but the way that it's framed just looks great. Like, it's just iconic. It's burned into my brain.
Commenting on the Stars office real quick, the Chris's jacket is even a deep cut reference.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's extra rewarding to somebody who put a lot of time into Resident Evil 1.
For sure.
No, I love that room. I love it in the remake too.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Steve, how do you feel about the way that Biohazard 2 looks?
Well, I think everyone's already touched on the main key points, right? Like, you know, how it looks stellar and has aged fairly well. Character models are, you know, highly detailed blocks that we can tell what they're meant to be and what they're trying to get their point across as. I think they animate, you know, particularly Birkin's transformation animations and stuff animate really, really well. I would argue that the only visual down point now really is artifacting and stuff on, like, you know, when I was playing the PS1 version through the PS3 for, you know, as a refresh before we played this, and I would say that the backgrounds have artifacted a fair bit. So I wonder how you go about, like, I mean, the HD project obviously upscales it, but there has to be a line between what is considered too nice.
Yeah,
almost.
I get you. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to have a consistent visual tone that is somewhere in my mind's eye, and too nice can't cut it. So it looks that acceptable level of poo.
It's completely fair, Steve. Sorry to jump in. I'm just going to say that is so. I completely agree, and I think Steve is right. Yesterday and today, I played it on a CRT, and it looks incredible. So you don't get the artifacting, but it's such a fair point.
I can't believe I'm about to say this. I'm going to defend at least one room in the sewers as being actually not pointless and bland, and it's the room where Hunk's team is scattered around. There's like bullet holes in the walls. There's a story actually in that room. Other ones kind of rubbish, and the ones you lead into are rubbish as well. But, you know, aside from that, okay. Actually, other than that, I think everyone else has hit all the points I want to say. So, yeah, it just looks good. Artifacting's a bit rubbish, though.
I played my recent playthrough on the GameCube version, and I had to go into the options and turn the brightness way up. Because like, that port is a little bit ropey on those kind of things. It was perfectly fine once I'd done that, but it was kind of like, this is weird that I have to do this, unfortunately. So, yeah, it'd be nice to get like a lush version that doesn't go too far with neating up, just makes it just pop it out a little bit more.
Yeah, make it look nice, but not like, you know, so nice that it's now in an art gallery. Just
right. Yeah, we have talked a lot about visuals, but Sherbin, any last points on visuals?
I mean, everyone has already touched on it. This game is a masterpiece. It's worth a small bit of shout out to, I think, in terms of the changes to the visuals of like menu screens and stuff like that. It's really nice.
Yeah.
It's worth shouting those things out. Choice for the title screen being the eye, really nice. I think the key point for me, and this is perhaps a little bit visuals, a little bit gameplay, is the level design is good in terms of how the RPD building goes around in circles, so it's easy to kind of find different routes to get to where you want to or whatever else. And that I think is an important key point. But yeah, I mean, you're right. The really interesting comparison for me is I actually quite liked, as in really liked, the way that 1.5 presented the RPD building. I really liked that feel for the RPD building. And I feel you could introduce character to it with that kind of visual. But this stands out so much more. It looks more lived in.
Yeah.
It looks more populated. And I get that isn't how it would work because, granted, I haven't spent much time in police buildings, if any. But the point is that I imagine they're not kind of like, they're obviously not cluttered. I imagine you've got clean hallways and whatever else, right? But if you were to look at another game which is comparative of the time, Dino Crisis, that has very clean hallways. That has very open areas. It's not as iconic to play through as much as I really do love that game. Like actually understanding what the areas are, the storytelling just isn't there as much. The most you're ever going to get is a corpse or some blood splats up against a wall or something along those lines. There's so many small details. There's so much emergent narrative coming out of those pre-rendered screens. Absolute brilliance, like literal brilliance. Which leads us nicely onto the part that I hopefully not forget, which is music.
No, certainly. I was literally about to say, since you're here, Sharon, would you like to start talking about the audio of the game, sound effects, voice acting, and of course the soundtrack?
Okay, so sound effects, they're very much what you would expect. I think there are some truly grisly, appropriately bubbly, visceral, wet noises for various different things, like that you may not expect, like eyelids opening or whatever else, or people die in spectacular fashions. There's appropriate amounts of gun splats and so on, and gunshots sound exactly as they should, which is all good. Doors sound appropriately weighty when they fall down, or grates or whatever else, so that's all good. Voice acting is definitely solid. Granted, there's a couple where you go, okay, this is slightly showing its age now, but not really in the grand scheme of things. We'll take out the actual dialogue itself and just look for who the voice actors are. That all kind of works. Soundtrack, and this is an interesting point about the visuals, because for me the really interesting comparison is if you're to look at Resident Evil 2 now, the remake, and then look at the original Resident Evil 2, there's a really interesting point where we've crossed over to in terms of this is how you make a survival horror game now, and that is scary to people, versus this is what you did back in the day. There's this, Resident Evil 2 creates this idea, whether you realise it or not, where you are running from Oasis of Light to Oasis of Light. And that's kind of how it works. And, there is a soundtrack playing in the background. That's how it gives it a sense of eeriness. That's how it gives it foreboding. That's how it does everything else. Now, you find yourself going, we can literally have rooms that are black, or they are flickering lights, or they are whatever else. And they're not like the Doom flickering lights, which is pretty much the only thing that existed around that time. They are, something that feels much more atmospheric. And the answer is, there's no audio. Except maybe a sinister rumble, very, very low, almost imperceptible kind of rumble. There's no audio, because that's what gives you the suspense or whatever else, like that moment of holding your breath, nothing is happening. By comparison, Resident Evil 2 creates music which feels like it sets the scene. The soundtrack is probably one of the strongest characters in the game, and that's the best way I've got to describe it. It's arguably the best Resident Evil soundtrack. That's hard because I really like RE3 as well, but it's really, really, really good. And I think this is from a golden age of video game soundtracks, which, quite frankly, if you were to ask people, what are your favourite video game soundtracks, I imagine, a healthy dose of them are from this period. Because it's that perfect bit where video game soundtracks had to, could really step up. Now they've actually got far less compression than they used to have on the new generation of consoles, but also they had to do so much legwork because everything else was kind of there, but not quite. Ultimately, you are controlling a collection of cardboard boxes running around with a face painted on it. They need to kind of give that slight more emotive connection to someone. It can't afford to just be silent and wait for eeriness. Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, let's put it this way. For me, one of the biggest disappointments of last year is when I put RE2 Remake onto my PS5 that I couldn't play with the original soundtrack on it anymore, and that made me very sad. Because I don't like playing RE2 in any form without the soundtrack. Literally that. So.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I did and now that's what I call about Remake too, so I've got my opinions on that soundtrack out there. It's a totally different beast to the original, and Showing you and I are quite similar, and I'm sure we're not alone on this panel or listeners to people that will just listen to this soundtrack out of joy, out of relaxation. The music's like home. It shouldn't be. It's spooky, you know, and horrible, but you know, that comes hand in hand with nostalgia, and it's because it's so good that I can just listen to it in a vacuum. But in context, it's incredible. Like, not just as pieces of music, but also for setting scenes and for raising the hair up on your neck. You know, we talked about it when we did the Now episode for this. You know, the clattering sounds in that are part of the music in the background and that kind of stuff. Yeah, like I joked on Twitter before we recorded that after every heading I just put perfect as my note. I literally have for the audio. This is simply a perfect soundtrack.
I defy anybody to find a better audio track than either of the Marshalling Yard tracks.
They're right up there. I love First Floor as well. Fantastic. And, you know, I've said it before, but that it has this leitmotif running through it. You know, it's just... People will say, and we all know that it's stupid, that people will just go, video game music, it's just a bunch of beeps and bloops, isn't it? But this is so far punching above that level. Like, you don't need... It didn't need to be this... It's like the meme. You don't need to go this hard. But it does. Like, we could do 5 more episodes of Now That's What I Call Survival Horror on RE2. And I'd be on every single one and I wouldn't get bored of it. I love this soundtrack dearly. Steve, this soundtrack does something that I know that you love, that I noticed on my recent retread. There are so many pieces of music on this soundtrack that only play like once.
Yeah.
Go off.
It's scene setting stuff, and it's a strong, like, I feel like in terms of tone between this and RE3, this is the one that's the most B-movie in a horror sense. And it fits so well. It's so strong. Like, you know, and then you got like your big leitmotif scenes, like you said, with like, you know, Birkin's boss theme being and then every other thing has like a variation on that. Yeah,
that's the one.
Yeah, and you only hear them like once or twice, and then you've got like Sherry's theme, Ada's theme. Some of these like soundtracks are like exclusive to certain scenarios as well, which is crazy.
Yep.
I want to, because we're all like singing its praises, I have to like come in the defense of the one time Remake 2 had a better soundtrack. And, you know, this is not any marks against Remake 2 or RE2 proper, but it did Hunk a lot more justice. Because in this, that one is kind of like the wet fart of the band.
Yeah, fair.
If you want to hear the full in-depth discussion about me, Si's already said it about 40 times, but now that's what I call survival horror. Me and Si really went deep on this, and I feel like I want to give the room to everyone else.
That's completely fair. I just wanted to shout that bit out for you because I know you absolutely love that kind of stuff. And again, me playing through doing Leon A, Claire B, like there was a bunch of tracks that I never get to hear because I don't play the game that way. Like there's one when you encounter Sherry again just before you get on the train car to go to the lab. There's a piece of music that plays there, and I don't know the last time I heard that piece of music. There's a bunch of stuff that is not like as part of the quote unquote soundtrack. Like the stuff in cutscenes and some of these like one-off occurrences in just single playthroughs that I just forgot about because they're not part of your average YouTube playlist or the Spotify release of the soundtrack. I'm like, Gee, yeah, I completely forgot about this. Not to mention the fact that I played Extreme Battle for the first time ever last night.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, there's a bunch of cool music in this too, you know.
I think that's got some 1.5 tracks in there.
I think so, yeah.
repurposed.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Bergs, how do you feel about the audio for RE2?
It was No, I'm kidding. It's obviously perfect in every way, shape, and form. Again, just thinking of how some of the sound cues in this game lead to sound cues in games going forward to today. Like walking into, because of how the game is structured, like you walk into a room and the first thing you have to do is wait a minute to see if you hear any zombies shuffling or hear any moaning happening.
Yeah. For me, it's the liquor breaths that will
yeah,
you forever, right? Yeah, rattly inhale. It's iconic.
Yeah. God, it's just. I mean, you all have said it. You all have said everything there is to be said about it. It's absolutely perfect. The soundtrack slaps in every capacity. Sound design, how it's executed,
modes.
like. Yeah, y'all did it. Y'all done said the good thing.
You're talking about sound effects and stuff, though, Bergs. Like, creature sounds in this are pretty fantastic, especially for the era.
Absolutely.
You've got, so much character in zombies that are just literally groaning. And then the liquor breathing, which it gets carried through, I think, generationally. I think it makes it as far as, like, Umbrella Chronicles liquors.
Absolutely.
That's pretty neat.
It's so cool. And you think about other games at the time and how they use sound. I think of Symphony of the Night, which came out a year before this game did. Which obviously uses sound in a great way. The soundtrack is legendary there as well. But in terms of like environmental sound design, there's not really any of that happening in Symphony. And I mean, I guess, but it's not the same thing. This game did it.
Yeah.
And then the games that every game afterward tried to trace this dragon.
We haven't really talked about the voice performance too much. Any thoughts on the voice acting?
Are you asking me to dive off from that point?
Yeah, go for it. We can keep going around.
Sure. Voice acting is fine for the era. It's better than Resident Evil 1. Not as good as Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, it's fair.
You know, there's not a lot. There's some happening around this time. I don't remember when Fear Effect came out. Fear Effect had voice acting too. Like,
I think that's after Silent Hill 1, so it's after RE2 and maybe RE3's era.
So it's up there, but it's still 1996, and it's 1996. It was localized at that time, so like there's that level of it too, and the content that it's spoofing is also from the 80s. So like 80s and early 90s. So like for what it is, it's fantastic, but it is still what it is.
I think, Sherwin, I think it was you that sort of hit the nail on the head for me with the performance, in the sense that none of these characters just sort of stand around waffling too much. They pretty much deliver what you need to know and move on. So that's great. The writing is great in that sense. I'd certainly agree that it's pulling from the 80s and stuff like that. So there's some cheese in it. Performance-wise, it's pretty good. Like, it really ranges, I think, from really great still to the odd little bit that's like, not so much. Some of it feels a little bit awkward, especially during some of the FMVs, I find feels a little awkward. But yeah, Alison and Paul as Claire and Leon, I mean, that's iconic again. Gary Crawford as Irons, I mean, I already said how great Irons is, and his performance is a big part of that. I think Rod Wilson, going to throw that name out there, the secret MVP of the game. Not only does he play Officer, tell you the whole story of the first game, he has a great performance as kind of a bag Ben Bertolucci, sarcastic sort of New Yorker, and the narrator as well. To me, he's like an unsung voice hero of this game. But there you go. Kelsey, how do you feel about the audio top to bottom?
Yeah, the voice acting is really good. People, Resident Evil is a bit of a meme with the voice acting. Not with this game. Like RE2, it's good. It's good for the time, and it's still not too. It's not too bad now, honestly. Like, the dialogue at times is kind of thin on the ground and straight to the point, but as you've said, it does what it needs to do. And I think, Claire and Leon, voice actors in particular, are both really, really strong. Yeah, big fan of it. And it's weird. That's something that only since thinking about the podcast and stuff I wanted to talk about when I was playing it in the last kind of 24 hours, I was like, yeah, the voice acting is really good in this game. So yeah, it was better than I even remembered playing it, last year. So I don't want to hear a bad word said about it. I'll kind of keep the rest simple. Like, you've all sort of touched on it. The soundtrack is amazing. It's my favourite soundtrack in the franchise. Front Hall, Save Room, Leon with Claire, Marshalling Yard, Second Malformation of G, Escape from the Lab. All of these tracks are going to be with me to the day I die. And,
yes,
they experimented and just upped the ante from the first game. Just absolutely outrageously good for a video game. And Berg's mentioned Metal Gear Solid. That did the same sort of stuff with music and voice acting. RE2's doing it here as well. All the horror influences, John Carpenter and stuff, it's rife. But then we just even get so much melodic stuff, which makes it so easy to listen to. Like, Si, you and I did the RE4 soundtrack recently on Now That's What I Call Survival Horror, and that's not something you make a habit of listening to chill out. This soundtrack you can listen to. It's so easy listening, for want of a better phrase. Yeah, it's just knocks all the right notes, makes the experience unforgettable. It anytime you hear the pieces of music, you can instantly visualize the locations. And yeah, nothing else to say really. I've spoken at length about Front Hall and the Save Room theme on other fast stuff. So yeah, just going to say the soundtrack is awesome, and sound effects are awesome. I was going to talk about the liquor as well, but you've already done it. It's 5 out of 5 for the soundtrack and sound.
I'm going to say one last point on the music that is sentimental to the point of perhaps silliness, but that's okay. We're arriving at conclusion, so it's time for some patented psi hyperbole. I think that if I was ever presented with, yes, you can continue playing Resident Evil 2 as much as you like, but there's no audio for the rest of your life. You just can play it with no audio. Or alternatively, you never play the game again, but you can listen to the soundtrack as much as you like. The soundtrack has such a piece of me that I think I would go for that latter option. Like I've played this game to death. So like I have all those warm memories that come with that soundtrack. But if I had to play the game without this audio, as much as I can say how perfect a game it is, I'll take the soundtrack. At this point, I want that forever. That is going to be, that, as you've so rightly put, with me till the day I die. And that brings us perfectly to final thoughts on Resident Evil 2 1998. Steve, is Resi 2 a good game? I feel like it's a good game.
Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? It's pretty good. I've said before, like elsewhere, this is like my number 3 best game of all time ever. It's certainly my favourite Resident Evil game, and it's probably not a ringing endorsement to say it's probably one of the most coziest games. If I just want to like sit down, have a quiet evening and relax with a survival horror game, it's this one. It's just nostalgia drips all over me. Okay, I will like ignore any small flaws and just gorge myself on this thing. I personally think it's got one of the best stories in a Resident Evil game. It's got one of the best soundtracks, some of the best enemies. It feels like it's pure empowerment on steroids. And, Hunk's there too. It's amazing when you think about it. I mean, there's a part of the back of my mind that wants to say all the best Resident Evil games start from failed experiments, like 1.5, like 3.5. And this starts the trend. It's also best on system. Like, if I had to choose between like this, Metal Gear Solid or Tekken 3, it's this every time. So, system seller. There's a reason why it's got a legacy, and it lives up to its infamy. It's pretty good.
It's pretty good. Bergs, aside from the terrible story, what do you think of Resident Evil 2?
I don't think I cared for it very much. Absolute game. Like, I absolutely hated the storyline. Completely cardboard cutout characters. Why don't they just go ahead and let's just go ahead and watch RoboCop, y'all? No, I'm kidding. I absolutely love this game. It's absolutely wonderful. I stand for where I'm in my 25 years later place and being like, it's kind of like there are games that are more fun to play now. for me specifically. But for a game that came out when it did, it literally is genre defining, platform defining. It's very, 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 very good.
I like it. Succinct. Kelsey, final thoughts. RE2, go.
Okay, let's take a breath. So, like, I've really tried my best to not sound like, some toxic nostalgia infused fanboy tonight, but like, I honestly believe so much of what I've said. I believe in the authenticity of what I'm saying, and I've played this game many times in my life in recent years and before the podcast, and it's still hitting all the notes that I've talked about tonight, that everyone's talked about. And a few of you have used the P word during this episode, and I've been holding off because I kind of wanted to just for it to have its place in my conclusion. And you see these memes online about what is a 10 out of 10 game, what is a perfect game, and I think sometimes we can often try and be a bit too cool and say, nothing's perfect because this one thing over here wasn't a perfect aspect, so it can't be a perfect game. And it's just, we're scared to use that terminology when describing these things because people like to argue, and I'm not hesitant to say it. Like, this is a perfect game. I think all the key aspects we've all talked about today just have such big strengths and it knocks it out the park in so many different ways that there's no question that it's a perfect game. Any little flaw, like Steve said, it doesn't matter. It just gets trumped by all the good stuff. The story, the gameplay, the visuals, all in the context of the era it came out, and then even when playing it today, it just still feels as strong as it did. And I think, Resident Evil 1 was a turning point for me in gaming, and Resident Evil 2 just turned things even more. It's my favourite game of all time. It's the best game in the Resident Evil series for me. I've loved many things about many of the other RE games that came after it in the franchise, but Berg said it earlier, this is the dragon that the series has been chasing ever since, and it will never hit these heights again for me. And I think we could talk about it for days. I could talk about it for days. It's not possible for me to come away from this podcast feeling like I've done the game justice, but with this game, in my opinion, the stars aligned. It's a sequel that's better than the original. It's better than anything that came after it, and it'll never be topped.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to disagree with any of those points, certainly. I've already said it before, it's my favourite Resident Evil game of all time. Shocking, I know. It's also, it's my favourite game of all time. So yes, this was going to be a very biased podcast, and you can't kind of escape the nostalgia with it. It's been hugely important and informative for me, and it's always been there, when I need that moment to myself, I'm going to isolate myself from all the bullshit of the world. I'm going to isolate myself in the RPD. And Steve, you're right. Weirdly, it's a survival horror comfort game that I'm still playing all these years later. Literally, when we're done with this, I'm going to go and play some more Extreme Battle because, again, I can't believe I've never played it before, and I'm having a great time, which is lovely to have a new experience with this game. It nothing will ever top it for me personally. This is the most loving fest, ridiculous episode for me. It was going to. I think we've done okay, but I'd like to think that most people listen to this. Generally, a lot of people are going to agree that it is the big P word, which is puzzles. Obviously, is what you mean. Right? It's perfect. Sherwin, final thoughts on Resident Evil 2.
Resident Evil 2 is an incredibly special game. It's a game which, in a roundabout way, is the reason why we're all sitting here talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's
absolutely
a reason. It's a game that, for me especially, has a very, very special place in my heart because of what it has enabled me to do in my life. More than any other Resident Evil game. This one has literally grabbed my life by the whole. This isn't hyperbole, by the way. It sounds this way, but it's genuinely not. It literally grabbed my life, by the horns, completely twisted in a random direction, sent me spinning off into a completely different concept of what I do and who I am and so forth. And for that, I will always be eternally thankful that I spent so many hours ploughed into this game and found such affection, such love for it. I've said before that the best Resident Evil game is Resident Evil 1 Remake. On any given day, this could be better, depending on what mood I am in. Literally that. And I don't say that lightly, because Resident Evil 1 Remake is a perfect game, and this is too. To steal your language, KDB. I think this is a game which, for me, if I think, I don't know, I mean, when I first got the gig to make a board game of this, I literally, within the space of, the moment I could sit down at a desk, just drew out every single one of the maps, went, right, this is all of the maps for the entire game. This is where all the enemies appear. This is all the items. This is exactly where you find them all. This is where, this is where they are. This is what this game could look like. Literally in the space of, as soon as I found a desk, just wrote it all down from memory. That's how ingrained this game is into my head. If I were to close my eyes, I could think of any one of the music tracks, think of any one of the enemies with absolute accuracy. And I haven't even picked the game up for a few years, because I don't necessarily need to. I appreciate, probably should have prepared for this game for this podcast by playing the game a bunch of times. Didn't need to, because I've played it so much.
Yep.
I literally know it like the back of my hand. This is Resident Evil 2 is an incredible achievement as a game. It is genre defining, it's groundbreaking in terms of its scope, it is perfect, and none of us should be ashamed for gushing over how good this game is, or how influential this game is, or the fact that we're all sitting here talking about this, because ultimately Resident Evil 2 is, I would say it's the best game ever made if Vagrant Story didn't exist. That's literally, well, no, that's the highest praise I could probably give anything. To be fair, so that's a close second.
Well, it's done. We have achieved it. Well done, everyone. We managed to get through the long-awaited Resident Evil 2 podcast. Nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors, our patrons, and our listeners. Join the First Aid Spray Discord server to become part of our community and hear the show early and unedited. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and more. All of these links and all of our content can be found at faspraypod.com. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcasting apps. And if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review where you can and spread the good word. Don't forget you can support the show by picking up some merchandise or at patreon.com/FASprayPod for as little as $1 a month. In our next episode, we follow Mrs. Redfield from Raccoon to Rockfort, from video game to novelisation. It's the penultimate episode of Book Club, and it's time for S.T. Perry's take on Code Veronica. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all of the Pueblo people individually. I'm at Cyniac_123. Steve is at FB Steve Was Taken. Sherwin is at Sherwin's Agenda. Kelsey is at K_D_B_, and Burger is at It's Burger Time. And finally, thank you for listening and have a good week.
Muzu, you haven't played the original.
He's not.
Oh,
we should have done that.
I feel so sad.
Instead of playing bloody Final Fantasy Stranger of Paradise. It was fine, by the way. It's an okay game.
Chaos.
Yeah, and then he says there's that bit where he goes bullshit and then plays music on his phone and walks off, and we all laugh.
Chaos. It's a bit like a Sonic game then.
So
this extreme battle stream then. Sorry.
Yeah, let me just look my GameCube up. What are you talking about? If I could just stream from my TV, that would be great. But
you were about to say KDB?
I was just going to say, just while we've recorded, the entire time I've had on my TV, I've had a playthrough of Claire A and Leon B playing. It's just started Leon B.
Nice. So what you're saying is we got 2 more hours to do.
Yeah. But it's funny because just while I was talking, while everyone was talking, it's amazing actually how much of what was being said synced up with what was on my screen. It's actually quite creepy. That was an awesome. I've not done that before. I listen to some podcasts where they like play the game as they're talking about it. Like I've never done that. But I thought just to set the mood, I'm just going to have it playing on the TV, which was, that was an interesting experience. I just thought everybody did incredibly well, by the way. I don't know how.
Yes, well done, everyone.
Talking about that game almost feels redundant in a weird way, but because it's so great. But everybody, you all touched my heart, so thanks for that.